You are an old man resting in a stone manor, nestled in the green folds of the Loire Valley. The year is 1518, and the afternoon light, soft as a whispered prayer, filters through mullioned windows, painting warm, honeyed squares on the flagstones. Outside, roses climb trellises, and bees hum a low, hypnotic drone. You sit in a high-backed chair in the Château du Clos-Lucé, a wooden cane in your left hand, a leather-bound codex resting on your lap. Your hair has long since turned white, and your beard flows onto your chest like spun silk. Yet your eyes, still quick, dart over sketches you made only yesterday. The curl of a snail shell, the twist of a river's current, the arch of a falcon's wing caught mid-flight. Beside your chair lies a bundle of drawings, machines that might one day lift men into the air, mechanisms for draining marshes, designs for soaring cathedrals. On another table rests a small, fragile fig leaf you found in the garden this morning, its veins catching the light like silver threads. You turn the leaf between your fingers, marveling anew at the branching pattern that always seems to repeat in nature, from the limbs of trees to the network of rivers, from the spirals of water down to the curling wisp of your beard. Outside your chamber, footsteps echo down corridors of dressed stone. King Francis I of France, tall and vigorous despite his youth, strolls toward your quarters with a map under his arm. He seeks your counsel on bastions and walls, hungry for a mind that sees not only the physical world, but the potential hidden within it. You smile to yourself. The king calls you father, a beloved advisor. You are far from the dusty roads of Vinci, where you first held a frog and wondered how it leaped, far from the candle-lit halls of Florence, where your hands learned the weight of marble, far from the echoing refectories of Milan, where you set paint to plaster, as if binding time. And yet, despite the miles and the years, your childhood wonder still hums within you, like an insistent spiral of water, pulling you forward to the next question. As you watch the birds wheel outside the window, their wings slicing arcs in the sky, you feel that familiar tug. They make tight turns by subtle shifts of feathers, riding invisible currents. Even now, at the end of your life, you cannot let go of this dream, to see a man fly on wings of his own making. The world calls you painter, sculptor, engineer, architect, anatomist, musician, philosopher, yet your secret dream remains unfinished, folded away like the wings of a bird at rest. A fig leaf falls from your fingertips. It lands upon a page covered with ink spirals. Your mind drifts back to where it all began. A boy crouched by a puddle, watching frogs leap, and worlds reflected in muddy water. You take a breath, as deep and slow as a bell's toll. If you wish to walk with us through the dust of Vinci's roads and the candle-lit halls of Milan, then settle in and join our circle. And if you wish to hear more such journeys, the Stone Sleeper Stories hearth is always warm. You need only subscribe to return here again. This invitation is not merely a polite formula. It is a promise that we will linger in each moment, letting the sensory details soak into your bones. On this journey you will smell the damp earth of Tuscan fields and the metallic tang of Verrocchio's workshop. Taste rustic fava bean stew and courtly sweetmeats. Feel the cool plaster of frescoes and the warmth of a royal hand. The narrative will alternate between immersing you inside Leonardo's mind and stepping back to watch his life unfold. It will weave three motifs: a fig leaf with its branching veins, the spiral of water with its hypnotic motion, and the wing of a bird with its promise of freedom. Through every arc, each motif will whisper of Leonardo's obsessions, the connection between microcosm and macrocosm, the secrets of nature's patterns, and the longing to transcend earthly bounds. Allow these motifs to anchor you as we travel together. Let them guide you back when you drift. The hills of Tuscany roll like the backs of sleeping beasts, carpeted in vineyards and olive groves. Vine shoots twist upward around poles. Fig trees scatter their leaves like green hands. In the small town of Vinci, sunlight paints terracotta roofs, and cobblestone streets wind between stone houses. In the mid-15th century, this is a quiet place. Shepherds call to their goats. Bells ring out the hours. Women with baskets gossip at the well. In such surroundings, you are born on April 15, 1452, an illegitimate son of a notary, Ser Piero da Vinci, and a local peasant girl, Caterina. The circumstances of your birth mean you will never attend Latin school or study Greek like other men of letters. Yet what you lack in formal education, you make up for in curiosity. Nature becomes your teacher, her language whispered in leaves and streams. Imagine yourself back then, a wiry boy with dark hair and serious eyes, wandering vineyards in bare feet. You pick up stones to weigh them. You trace patterns in mud. You chase lizards and gently flip them over to study the arrangement of their scales. One evening, just past the harvest, twilight paints the sky in hues of lavender and peach. Olive pickers head home, laughing, baskets on their hips. You have snuck away, drawn by something unexplainable. A call to observe. In a damp corner of your father's workshop courtyard, there is a shallow puddle left over from the day's washing. Frogs gather there, chirping and splashing. You crouch, your knees pressed against your chest, your breath held so you don't disturb them. Your eyes narrow, focusing on the muscles in the frog's legs. They tense. They release. The frogs spring. Their bodies describe arcs through the air, almost as if they temporarily defy gravity. You reach for a stick and scratch on the packed earth, a crude outline, capturing the frog mid-jump. Your strokes are quick, but your mind holds the motion in slow detail. How does a tiny creature store such power? Is it in the proportions of bone and tendon? Do the same patterns appear in other animals? A bell tolls. Its chime vibrates through the thin autumn air. Candles flicker to life in the windows of your family's modest house. You should hurry back. Ser Piero is strict about supper, though not unkind. But another shape catches your attention, a fig leaf lying near your knee. It is large, lobed, veined like a river delta. In the fading light, you see how each vein branches into smaller and smaller veins, dividing but always maintaining the same angle. It reminds you of maps in your father's study. You pick up the leaf, run your fingers over its ridged surface. The patterns call to you, the micro and the macro, reflecting each other. You fold the leaf and tuck it into your pocket. It is a secret emblem, a motif you will return to again and again. As you stand, you hear your name called, not Leonardo but Agnolo, a pet name. You smile. You dash toward the house, one hand on the fig leaf in your pocket, the other pumping like a bird flapping wings to gain lift. Inside, the table is laid with bread, cheese, and bowls of fava bean stew. Ser Piero sits at the head, his notary's ring glinting, his gaze steady. Beside him, his legitimate wife, your stepmother, hands out ladles of stew. Your younger half-siblings chatter. As you slide onto your bench, tucking your leaf deeper into your garment, your father begins to speak of Florence. There is opportunity there for those with talent, he says, breaking bread. Masters who can teach the arts of painting and goldsmithing. Perhaps, in time, I will arrange an apprenticeship for our boy. He gestures toward you. Heat rises in your cheeks. Florence, the city of Brunelleschi's dome, where statues come to life and saints' stories are painted in colors brighter than dreams. You press your fingers around the fig leaf, feeling its ridges imprinting your skin. In your mind, you see the frog leap again. You sense motion and potential, not just in the animal, but in yourself. One day soon, you will leave these hills. The curiosity that compels you to follow frogs will find new subjects. For now, you take another bite of stew, swallow, and glance toward the door, as if expecting the world to burst in at any moment with news of wonders. Days pass into months. You spend mornings in your father's workshop, watching him draw up contracts and write legal opinions. The nib of his quill scratches paper methodically. You practice writing your own name with his cast-off pen nibs, but the shapes feel awkward, the letters foreign. You prefer to draw faces, animals, plants, each in the margins of scrap parchment. You roam the countryside, picking wildflowers, marveling at dew's refracted light, climbing olive trees to watch birds' nests. Sometimes, you free caged birds sold by itinerant vendors, paying a coin only to open the door and let them burst into the sky. It makes you happy to watch them find the wind. You imagine what they see. Do they notice patterns in the fields like you notice in leaves? One afternoon, you accompany your father to a neighbor's land to survey boundaries. Ser Piero squints along a line of stakes, measuring. You hang back by a stream. The water swirls around rocks, eddies, and spiral patterns forming and dissipating. You lean closer, nose almost touching the water's surface. The current catches a fallen fig leaf, spinning it around and around before carrying it downstream. Something about that swirling spiral grabs your mind. The pattern of the water seems to echo the shape of snail shells you've collected. The twist of a cloud, perhaps even the pattern of hair at the crown of your head. You watch until the leaf disappears. Later, as you scratch another frog into the dirt, you add a spiral in the corner, connecting motion to water, to leaves, to your own restless thoughts. Already, motifs start to layer themselves inside you, the fig leaf's veins, the spiral of water, the arcs of wings. You do not yet know that these will guide your life like constellations in the night sky. Winter arrives. The vineyards stand bare, the soil dark and cracked. You spend long evenings by the hearth, carving small wooden animals with your pocket knife. You catch glimpses of traveling mendicants telling stories of distant lands. One mentions Florence again, and you imagine its cathedral dome, the largest in the world, rising like a shell. Ser Piero notices your carvings. He also notices the sketches you've hidden beneath your bed. Animals, landscapes, machines that might scoop water. He says little, but one day he places a piece of vellum on your workbench. Practice on this. If your hand is skilled, there are masters who could guide it further. You bow your head, gratitude swelling. Outside, snowflakes drift, each one a tiny masterpiece of geometry, each one a unique arrangement of arms and angles. You watch them melt on your sleeve, leaving behind a faint wet mark like a miniature spiral. As the seasons turn, you grow. Your body stretches, your hands grow deft. You begin to draw with ink and quill, making more permanent the observations you once scratched in dirt. You sketch birds mid-flight, trying to capture the exact way their wings curve downward on the downstroke and flip up on the upstroke. You capture the shadows of hillsides at different times of day. You draw your stepbrothers as they sleep, noticing how their eyelids twitch when they dream. You draw your mother's hands, rough but graceful, shaped by milking goats and kneading bread. Her fingers remind you of the fig leaf, strong midrib, delicate veins. You start to sense that drawing is not just copying, it is understanding the inner structure of a thing. To draw a hand, you must know how bones, tendons, and skin interact. To draw a bird, you must understand not just wings, but also the muscles along its breast and the hollow bones that make it light. Curiosity sometimes gets you in trouble. One day, you attempt to dissect a lizard you found dead by the roadside. Using your pocket knife, you carefully cut into its belly, peeling back skin to reveal tiny organs. You are fascinated by the arrangement of heart, stomach, and lungs. Your stepmother enters suddenly and gasps in horror. "What are you doing?" she cries, seizing the lizard and throwing it into the fire. She scolds you for playing with dead things. You stand, chastened, but the image of the lizard's inside stays with you. Later that night, you secretly sketch what you remember, labeling parts with your own invented terms. The motif of dissected form will surface again decades later when you perform human autopsies by candlelight, drawing muscles and veins with scientific precision. On warm days you lie in fields and watch clouds move. They break apart, reassemble, spin in slow vortices. You become aware that even air has currents. You blow dandelion seeds and watch them drift, noting how they spin and wobble. You press the seeds between pages of your notebook, along with dried fig leaves. You cut small holes in parchment and blow through them to test airflow. You tie feathers to sticks and twirl them. You carve wooden propellers and spin them between your palms, observing how they generate lift. It is play, but it is also research. Without formal mentors, you teach yourself by manipulating the world. Each experiment seeds a question. How do birds steer? Why do leaves fall in spirals? Can man harness these principles? At 13, you feel restless. Vinci feels small. You have drawn every hill, studied every stream. You want more subjects. One evening, you overhear your father telling a friend about Florence's art. Giotto's frescoes in Santa Croce, Donatello's David, Ghiberti's bronze doors, he says, listing wonders. The Medici gather the greatest minds. You lean closer. After the friend leaves, you approach your father. "Father, will you take me to Florence?" you ask boldly. He looks at you, seeing not just a boy but an insistent spirit. "Your time will come," he replies, "when you are ready." You nod, but inside you vow, "I am ready now. I want to see the dome's ribs up close. I want to smell pigments ground fresh. I want to feel chisel on marble." A few months later, Ser Piero informs you that he has arranged for you to apprentice with Andrea del Verrocchio, a master painter and sculptor in Florence. The news hits you like a sudden gust of wind. You feel both exhilaration and fear. You pack your drawings, your knife, your dried leaves. You say goodbye to your mother and siblings, promising to write, though you know you likely will not. At dawn, you set off with your father, leaving behind the vines of Vinci. As the hills recede, you clutch your fig leaf, now brittle but cherished. The road to Florence unfurls before you, like a scroll waiting to be filled with new patterns. The child's journey to Florence marks not just a physical relocation, but a transition between innocence and the wide world. In that liminal space, as the cart rattles along, you gaze at olive groves turning to fields, villages giving way to the city's silhouette. Each jolt of the wagon wheel feels like a heartbeat. The fig leaf in your pocket rustles whenever your hand brushes against it, a tiny reminder of home. The spiral of dust swirling behind the wagon glitters in the morning light, echoing the water spirals you watched as a boy. The call of birds overhead seems to say, "Follow your curiosity." it will be your compass. At last, the walls of Florence appear, the great dome rising like a sun. You feel anticipation surge. This new chapter will challenge you, inspire you, and set in motion a life whose arc will be as intricate as the veins of a leaf. While you wait for the city gates to open, you think about what you are leaving behind: the smell of your mother's bread, the songs of shepherds, the rough bark of the fig tree in your yard. You feel a pang of sadness, but it is tinged with excitement. Change is both loss and opportunity. You press your hand to your chest, feeling the fig leaf's outline through your tunic. You inhale deeply, tasting the dust and the promise of adventure. The gates open, groaning on their hinges. You step through, leaving the sleepy hills of Vinci for the bustling heartbeat of Florence. The story is only beginning. Florence, in the 1460s, is a wonder. The city-state is wealthy from banking and trade. Its merchants fund art and architecture that rival antiquity. The streets are narrow, lined with tall stone buildings whose windows peer like eyes. Bridges span the Arno River, their reflections shimmering in the water. Everywhere are signs of human industry. Masons chisel marble statues in workshops open to the street. Goldsmiths hammer delicate filigree. Painters grind pigments beneath porticos. The air smells of wet stone after rain, of charcoal from blacksmiths' forges, of spices from market stalls. Voices echo, vendors shouting prices, nuns chanting prayers, children laughing. At the center, Brunelleschi's dome crowns Santa Maria del Fiore, its terracotta tiles glowing in sunlight. It is a feat of engineering: double shells, ribs, rings, herringbone bricks. You crane your neck to take it all in. You think of the veins of your fig leaf, and how they branch out to support the whole. Dome and leaf, macro and micro, both rely on structure. Your father takes you to Verrocchio's bottega. The workshop is tucked behind a nondescript door, but inside it hums with activity. Apprentices of various ages draw charcoal studies, carve wooden panels, cast small bronzes. The walls are covered with sketches of drapery and anatomy. Jars of pigments: malachite green, cinnabar red, ultramarine blue, sit in orderly rows. The smell of linseed oil fills the air. A man with keen eyes and gray hair stands at a table, carving. This is Andrea del Verrocchio, master artist to kings and merchants. He looks you up and down, assessing your potential. Ser Piero introduces you. Verrocchio nods and puts you to work cleaning brushes. It may seem menial, but you relish the proximity to paint and talent. Your apprenticeship begins with chores: sweeping floors, heating wax, grinding lapis lazuli into powder. You learn to mix gesso from plaster and glue, to stretch canvases, to carve wood panels. Each task trains your hand and patience. You spend hours prepping pigments, crushing minerals, sifting powders through fine cloth, mixing them with egg yolk or linseed oil. The grinding stone's rhythmic sound becomes part of your days, like a heartbeat. The vivid colors that emerge feel magical. When you accidentally spill vermilion onto your hands, you hold them up, marveling at the richness. Later, you will study color scientifically: how light refracts, how pigments absorb, but now you simply delight in the sensory experience. Your first significant duty is to draw from life. Verrocchio instructs all apprentices to fill pages with studies: hands, feet, drapery. You take charcoal and paper and sit in a corner, sketching your fellow apprentices as they read or carve. You practice capturing weight and volume, shading to suggest form. You find ways to represent textures: the roughness of linen, the smoothness of skin. Sometimes Verrocchio passes by, peering over your shoulder. He nods if he approves. He gently corrects your lines if not. You learn to welcome criticism, to see it as a path toward refinement. You keep every scrap of paper, filling them with drawings of eyes, ears, curls of hair. You develop a habit of carrying a small notebook on your belt to record observations. When you walk home at night, you draw the way moonlight hits a puddle and creates a spiral shimmer. When you wait in line at the baker, you draw the baker's hands kneading dough. When a child cries at the market, you draw the tear tracks and the mother's hands soothing him. You draw life, always. Within weeks, you begin painting backgrounds and secondary figures on your master's commissions. Verrocchio values your fine hand. He assigns you to paint an angel's robe in his baptism of Christ for a church. You approach the task with reverence and nerves. You sit on scaffolding, mixing pigments to match the primary palette. You apply thin layers, letting underpainting show through. You carefully render folds of fabric, using sfumato shading to suggest depth. You imagine how damp cloth clings to skin. You look at the painting overall, noting how your figure fits into the composition. Your angel emerges, luminous, serene. When Verrocchio sees it, he stops. He smiles faintly. Perhaps he senses that your light touch could surpass his own. An anecdote will later claim that he never painted again after seeing your angel, but the truth is that he continues to work. Nevertheless, his confidence in you grows. He allows you to sign some lesser works. He gives you more autonomy. Beyond painting, the bottega exposes you to engineering. Verrocchio designs fountains and bronze statues. He repairs clocks and builds domes. He invites local engineers and mathematicians to his studio. One day, Filippo Brunelleschi himself visits. He describes how he designed the dome using a double shell and herringbone brick pattern. He sketches arches and ribs. You lean forward, absorbing every word. After the master leaves, you copy his drawings in your notebook, adding your own questions. How might these structural principles apply to wings? Could ribs and shells support a human glider? At night, you dream of a dome that is also a wing. You also meet other artists. Sandro Botticelli stops by to borrow pigments. He shows you his painting of Venus emerging from a shell. The goddess's flowing hair reminds you of water spirals. Domenico Ghirlandaio visits to hire extra hands for a fresco. He describes his method of painting wet plaster quickly before it dries. You listen, fascinated by the technical challenge. You know that each technique is a tool. You collect them like leaves. You observe how each artist moves his wrist, holds his brush, chooses his palette. You begin to form your own preferences. You like subtle transitions, soft edges, and natural light. You dislike harsh outlines. You appreciate complexity. Your evenings are no less busy. You return to your lodgings and practice drawing from memory. You read the few books you can borrow, treatises on perspective, collections of fables, treatises on geometry. You attempt to learn Latin grammar by copying passages, but you quickly lose patience. The letters do not hold your attention the way forms do. You prefer Euclid's diagrams. You pore over treatises by Piero della Francesca on perspective, tracing vanishing points. You sketch boxes receding into space. You design imaginary cities. You draw birds with wings extended, overlaying lines of perspective to approximate how their wings might pivot. You read about optics, experimenting with lenses and mirrors from the workshop. You hold a mirror at various angles, observing how light bends. You fill pages with notes and diagrams. On Sundays, you walk through the city, sketchbook in hand, absorbing Florence's life. You visit Or San Michele and study the statues of saints in niches. You admire Donatello's St. George, its contrapposto stance. You note how the sculptor conveys weight in stone. You attend Mass at the Duomo, if only to gaze at the frescoes and the architecture. You watch light filter through stained glass, creating colored patterns on the floor like scattered petals. You climb the dome's internal staircases, tracing the ribbing with your fingers. You feel the stone cool and solid beneath your palm, like the underside of a massive fig leaf. At the top, you look out over the city's roofs, its river, its fields beyond. You feel a sense of possibility. You think, if men can raise such a dome, can they not also raise themselves into the air? In the workshop, other apprentices come and go. Some are lazy. You surpass them quickly. Some, like Lorenzo de Credi, are diligent and talented. You respect them. You make a friend in a mischievous apprentice named Gian Giacomo Caproti, whom you nickname Salai, Little Devil, for his antics. He steals brushes and eats pies. He later becomes your model and confidant. His curly hair and androgynous beauty fascinate you. You draw him repeatedly, exploring gender ambiguity, sometimes dressing him in women's clothing for portraits. Your relationship with Salai is complex, part friendship, part mentorship, part attraction. Biographers will debate its nature. For you, it is another pattern to explore. As you gain confidence, you begin to think about leaving the workshop. Verrocchio has taught you all he can. You produce your own altarpieces and panels. You receive small commissions. In 1472, you are accepted into the Painters' Guild of Florence. You start to sign works as Leonardo da Vinci. Yet something restless stirs. You love painting, but you crave larger challenges. You think of designing machines, of studying anatomy, of engineering marvels. Florence offers much, but you imagine other cities. Milan with its courtly splendor, Venice with its canals, Rome with its antiquities. The Medici, who rule Florence, notice your talent. They ask you to perform at court, playing your silver lute shaped like a horse's head. You dazzle them with fables and improvised songs. Lorenzo de' Medici, the Magnificent, recognizes your potential beyond painting. When the Duke of Milan, Ludovico Sforza, seeks an engineer and artist, Lorenzo sends you with gifts as a cultural ambassador. He writes a letter praising your talents, listing your ability to design bridges, build war machines, sculpt in marble and bronze, paint whatever the Duke desires. He does not mention your dream of flight, but he hints at your ability to imagine what does not yet exist. On a spring day in 1482, you leave Florence. You walk out through the same gate you entered nearly 2 decades earlier. You glance up at the dome, at the sun glancing off its tiles, at the birds circling it. You whisper a thank you to Verrocchio and Brunelleschi. You tuck your fig leaf, now pressed, dried, and nearly translucent, into your notebook. You watch a whirl of dust behind your horse. The spiral looks like a coiled spring waiting to unspool. You set your gaze toward the north and follow the road to Milan. You do not know that you will not return to Florence for nearly 20 years. You carry with you a trunk of drawings, a head full of ideas, and an unquenched thirst for knowledge. The next arc of your life will take place at a court where power and art intertwine, where your skills will be tested in ways you can't yet imagine. The transition from Florence to Milan is not immediate. It is a liminal journey across the Apennines, through forests and fields, across rivers and towns. On the road you meet merchants, soldiers, pilgrims, and peddlers. You share food and stories around fire pits at night. You perform little tricks, like drawing caricatures in the dirt, to amuse children. You play your lute and make new friends. You observe how the clouds gather moisture differently over mountains, how the wind picks up along ridges. You measure the angle of sunlight at noon by holding a stick and noting its shadow. You experiment with constructing a makeshift compass from a needle and a cork in a bowl of water. You teach yourself navigation. You sketch everything: the swirling pattern of smoke from fires, the architecture of hillside villages, the way pack animals distribute weight. Each observation is a seed, each seed later blossoming into an insight about art or engineering. You realize that travel is as instructive as any workshop. When you reach the plains of Lombardy and see Milan's fortified walls, you feel a mixture of apprehension and excitement. You cross the threshold into your new world. In 1499, after nearly 2 decades in Milan, you will be forced to leave when the French invade. But before that, you will return to Florence briefly in the early 1480s to accept a major commission, an altarpiece for the monks of San Donato, known as the Adoration of the Magi. This arc demonstrates how your genius continues to grow, and how your perfectionism leads to incomplete masterpieces. When you return to Florence, you notice the city has changed. New buildings have risen. Artists like Botticelli have created masterpieces of mythological grace. You feel both like a homecoming son and an outsider shaped by the Milanese court. The commission is prestigious: a large panel depicting the 3 wise men offering gifts to the infant Christ. You envision a swirling composition of figures and horses. You design elaborate architecture in the background: arches, ruined temples, hints of classical columns reclaimed by vines. You fill your preparatory drawing, now called a cartoon, with hundreds of figures. You work furiously, your studio filled with charcoal dust. Monks visit occasionally, offering honey cakes and suggestions. You politely ignore their aesthetic guidance. You draft the faces of exotic men and women, referencing travelers' tales of African and Asian features. You draw horses rearing, their muscles tense like the frogs you once studied. You incorporate your motifs: a fig leaf on a monk's book, spiraling drapery that echoes water, a winged angel perched on a pillar. You are at the height of your powers, blending scientific observation with imaginative composition. And then, you stop. You leave the painting unfinished. Why? Some say you were offered a more lucrative post in Milan. Others think your perfectionism hindered you. You saw flaws you could not abide. In truth, perhaps it is both. You are drawn away by the possibility of designing grand machines for Ludovico Sforza, the chance to build the largest equestrian statue in Europe, the lure of a court that celebrates your polymathy. You set aside the adoration of the Magi, leaving behind a mesmerizing underdrawing. Centuries later, historians will lament the loss but also marvel at the dynamism still apparent in the sketch. It will become a glimpse into your mind mid-creation. Back in Florence, you also accept a commission to paint a portrait of a merchant's wife, Lisa Gherardini. Her husband, Francesco del Giocondo, wants a portrait to celebrate the birth of their second son. You meet Lisa, a woman in her mid-20s, with a reserved demeanor and sparkling eyes. You seat her on a loggia, with a distant landscape behind her, winding rivers, roads leading into the mountains, a bridge. You paint her over months, perhaps years, never delivering it. You will carry this painting, later called the Mona Lisa, with you for the rest of your life, tweaking it, adjusting the corners of her mouth, softening the shadows around her eyes. You will infuse the portrait with nuance, her smile ambiguous, the light on her skin luminous. You will use fumato to blur edges, making her seem to breathe. You will add veils and embroidery with near invisible lines. Underneath her hands, you will faintly sketch a spiral pattern, barely perceptible. Over time, the painting will become an obsession and a companion. During this period, you conceive a grand mural for the Council Hall of Florence's Palazzo Vecchio. The city officials commission you to paint a battle scene, the Battle of Anghiari, a Florentine victory over Milanese forces. Michelangelo, your younger rival, is hired to paint an opposing wall with another battle scene. Two titans will duel in paint. You design your composition: horses trampling, soldiers grappling, banners flying. You choose to depict the moment when the Florentine soldier Niccolò Piccinino tries to seize the standard from the enemy. You plan to experiment with a wax-based encaustic technique to achieve intense colors. You draw a massive cartoon filled with figures of unparalleled dynamism. You test your technique on the wall, heating the wax to fuse pigment. But disaster strikes. The heat required to melt the wax also causes the paint to drip. The colors run. You watch your work literally melting. Frustrated, you abandon the project. Michelangelo, meanwhile, is called away to Rome, leaving his wall bare. The hall remains unfinished by both giants. The lesson: even geniuses fail. You will reuse some figures from your battle cartoon in later works. The cartoon itself becomes an object of pilgrimage. Young artists copy your horses and soldiers, using them as master studies. Your return to Florence reveals another aspect of your genius: your ability to apply art to civic engineering. The city suffers from flooding by the Arno River. You propose a plan to divert the river and build canals, thereby reducing floods and facilitating commerce. You draw detailed maps, cross-sections, and water flow diagrams. You present your ideas to officials. They appreciate your ingenuity but balk at the cost. The project is shelved. Centuries later, engineers will attempt similar feats, confirming the soundness of your proposals. You also design defensive walls and canal locks. You propose a series of sluices to regulate water flow. You design a bridge that fans open like a leaf, allowing ships to pass. You conceive of a system of draining marshes in Pisa to create arable land. Some ideas are executed, many remain on paper, but all demonstrate that your mind ranges beyond painting. While in Florence, you re-encounter your own origins. You visit Vinci briefly, walking among familiar hills. You greet your half-brothers, now grown. You stand beneath the fig tree where you once plucked your first motif. Its trunk is thicker, its leaves are as veined as ever. You place your hand on the bark, feeling the rough ridges. You pick a leaf and compare it to the one pressed in your notebook. You marvel at how time changes, and yet certain patterns persist. You drink from the stream where you watch spirals. The water feels the same on your fingers. A dragonfly darts, its wings iridescent. You follow its flight. You breathe deeply, filling your lungs with the scent of rosemary and wet soil. You smile, feeling both childlike and ancient. Then you mount your horse and ride back to the city, carrying a new leaf and new questions. The arc of your Florence years ends with a mixture of accomplishment and frustration. You have created groundbreaking drawings and paintings, but you have also left two major works unfinished. People whisper that you lack the discipline to complete large commissions. You brush off the criticism, telling friends that ideas matter more than final products. In letters, you joke about being a man of infinite variety. Secretly, you feel the sting. You vow that in your next chapter you will finish what you start. When you leave Florence again, you feel both relieved and wistful. You ride north with your assistant, and your beloved painting of Lisa tucked among your belongings. You are heading back to Milan, but this time under French rule. Your life is about to intersect with politics, war, and scientific obsession. Returning to Milan in the 1490s, you find a city in turmoil. The French King Charles VIII has invaded Italy, toppling Duke Ludovico Sforza in 1499. The political chessboard is volatile. Alliances shift like clouds. Yet art endures, and patrons still seek your brilliance. The new French governor invites you to continue your work in Milan. You accept, partly out of necessity, partly out of attachment to the projects you began during your first Milanese stint. You re-establish your studio, greet friends, and reacquaint yourself with the city's waterways, fortresses, and markets. This arc is marked by two monumental endeavors, the equestrian statue of Francesco Sforza and the Last Supper. The equestrian monument is an engineering and artistic challenge. Commissioned by Ludovico decades earlier, it is to be the largest bronze horse ever cast, honoring his father. You design an enormous clay model, studying actual horses, drawing them from every angle. You note how their muscles bulge when they gallop, how their hooves strike the ground, how their tails curl. You consider structural stresses. To cast such a huge piece, you devise new foundry methods. You build a workshop outside the castle. You draft every component. When the French invade, they use the clay horse as target practice, destroying it. Years of work crumble under cannonballs. You feel anger, but also a strange acceptance. It teaches you that art is vulnerable to politics. You salvage drawings and move on. The Last Supper becomes your most famous work. Commissioned by the Dominican monks of Santa Maria delle Grazie, it will decorate their refectory. You choose to paint Christ announcing his betrayal, capturing each apostle's reaction. You plan the composition meticulously. You break tradition. Instead of placing Judas alone on the opposite side of the table, you seat him among the others, clutching a bag of coins, his elbow knocking over a salt cellar. You align Christ's head with a vanishing point behind him, making him the axis of the perspective lines. The apostles form 4 groups of 3, each reacting differently: shock, anger, disbelief, sadness. You study human expressions, observing how brows furrow, mouths open slightly, hands tense or relax. You ask monks to pose in various states of surprise. You memorize the face of a neighbor convicted of murder to use as Judas's likeness. You paint slowly, experimenting with an oil tempera mixture on dry plaster to achieve luminous colors. You layer glazes. You often climb the scaffold, apply a stroke, then climb down and walk to the other end of the hall to judge the effect. Your painstaking method annoys the prior, who scolds you. You retort that genius cannot be rushed, that sometimes you stand for hours without painting, just to ensure you capture the right expression. He complains to Ludovico, who supports you. Eventually, you finish. The work is spectacular. Visitors weep in front of it. You feel satisfaction, tempered by worry about the durability of your experimental technique. Unfortunately, within a few decades, the paint peels, humidity destroys sections, and later restorations further damage it. Nonetheless, even in ruin, its power endures. Your reputation grows. The French governor uses you as a cultural jewel to impress visitors. He commissions you to plan festivals with mechanical wonders, pageants featuring moving planets, lions that open their jaws and release fleur-de-lis. You design costumes, sets, and machines. You concoct fireworks that mimic celestial events. You create automata that walk, gesture, roar. Guests gasp at your ingenuity. You enjoy the theater of it. It is a chance to blend art, engineering, and narrative. You incorporate your motifs, spiraling fireworks, echoing water flows, fig leaves on costumes, wings in mechanical birds. You test small prototypes in your studio, laughing when they fail and trying again. You continue your anatomical studies, securing cadavers from hospitals. You dissect by candlelight at night. You cut into muscles and bones, drawing each layer meticulously. You note how the tendons attach, how they move. You write in mirror script to keep your notes private. You produce cross-sections of skulls, diagrams of the spine, detailed renderings of hearts. You discover that the heart has 4 chambers and that it works like a pump with valves. You record how blood flows in one direction. You study the eyes, describing the retina and how images invert. You dissect animals too. Birds, cows, pigs. You examine wings, noting how feathers overlap. You draw a bird's wing next to a bat's, comparing. You design a human-powered glider based on your observations. You test small models. You write about the possibility of a man taking flight. Though you never fly, your work will inspire future aviators centuries later. You also delve into hydraulics. You design canals to connect Milan to Lake Como and the River Adda. You draw lock systems that allow boats to move through different water levels. You observe whirlpools in rivers, noting how they follow logarithmic spirals. You experiment by dropping objects into water and recording the splash patterns. You write, Il moto dell'acqua è cosa continuata. The movement of water is continuous. Comparing it to the movement of blood in veins. You propose to dredge rivers to prevent flooding, to construct irrigation systems for agriculture. Some of your plans are implemented. Others remain on paper due to cost or politics. You discuss your ideas with mathematicians and natural philosophers. You sometimes invite them to your studio to view your model wings and water wheels. They leave impressed and slightly bewildered. During this period, you gather a group of assistants and students. Francesco Melzi, a nobleman's son, becomes your most devoted disciple and companion. He is gentle, educated, diligent. He copies your notes, organizes your drawings, assists in experiments. Unlike Salai, he is trustworthy and kind. Melzi will later preserve your notebooks. You also attract curious minds like Giovanni Antonio Boltraffio and Marco Diogenes. Your studio becomes a hive of activity. Apprentices painting copies of The Last Supper, sculpting small figures, preparing pigments, transcribing your ideas. You encourage them to observe nature. You take them to dissect animals, to watch birds, to draw drapery hung with varying weights. You challenge them to think beyond painting. Some follow. Others prefer the simplicity of copying masters. While you thrive creatively, Milan is unstable. The French and the Sforzas fight over it. In 1500, you flee when the French withdraw temporarily. You travel to Mantua, where Isabella d'Este commissions your portrait. You sketch her in profile, capturing her intelligence. You visit Venice, offering plans to defend the lagoon from the Turks. You propose building mobile barriers and underwater weapons. The Venetians appreciate your ideas, but do not fully implement them. You travel to Florence, where you paint the Battle of Anghiari, unfinished. Then back to Milan when the French regain control. You are like the water you study, flowing where opportunity allows, swirling around obstacles, never stagnant. Political upheaval teaches you adaptability. It also emphasizes your reliance on patrons. You learn to flatter kings while retaining independence. You learn to present yourself as indispensable. By the time you are in your 50s, your curiosity intensifies. You have painted masterpieces and designed monuments, yet you feel unsatisfied. You want to understand life's workings at the deepest level. You immerse yourself in science with the same fervor you once brought to painting. In this arc, your notebooks become your primary canvas. You fill them with diagrams, observations, and reflections. The pursuit of knowledge becomes almost spiritual, a way of communing with the patterns you sensed as a child. Your anatomical studies reach their peak. In hospitals, you obtain the bodies of executed criminals and unclaimed corpses. You dissect them systematically. You cut into muscles, measure the lengths of bones, peel back layers of skin. You study the heart, describing the aorta and pulmonary artery. You draw the heart from multiple angles, shading to show depth. You dissect fetuses, drawing them curled in utero, connected to mothers via spiraling umbilical cords. You note how the cord's twist resembles a double helix, though you do not conceive of DNA. You draw the bones of the hand, labeling each phalanx. You dissect an old man and a child, comparing muscle atrophy. You write about how veins appear blue but blood is red. You deduce that color is an optical illusion. You propose that the body is a machine governed by laws of physics. You imagine tiny channels conveying liquids. You draw cross-sections of the brain, illustrating ventricles. You theorize that the seat of the soul is not in the pineal gland, as Descartes will later think, but in the brain as a whole. You write with reverence. You call the body a miracle. You leave instructions that your anatomical notes be published, but they will remain largely hidden until the 19th century. Your obsession with water deepens. You study rivers, waterfalls, and streams. You throw leaves and seeds into currents to track flow. You stand by the shores of lakes, noting how waves break and reflect. You draw whirlpools and eddies. You write about water as a living thing, comparing it to blood. You propose that oceans were once higher, deducing that fossils found on mountains indicate ancient seas. You speculate on erosion and sediment deposition. You study capillary action, observing how water climbs the walls of glasses. You draw waves crashing against rocks, and note how spray forms delicate arcs. You describe the shape of raindrops. You design water wheels, hydraulic pumps, and irrigation systems. You propose controlling rivers to harness their power. Some of your water projects are built, others remain sketches. Flight remains your dream. You design dozens of flying machines. You study birds meticulously, observing their bone structure, muscle distribution, feather arrangement. You catch birds, gently spread their wings, and draw each feather. You watch them take off, noting the angle of their wings relative to the ground, the timing of their flaps. You attempt to fly by strapping wings to arms and jumping off low heights, but you quickly realize human strength cannot match that of birds. You pivot to designing gliders. You create a machine with a light wooden frame and silk wings like a bat's, meant to be launched from a hill. You design a helical screw powered by 4 men turning cranks, hoping it will rise like a cork from a bottle. You design parachutes to slow falls. You conceive of an aerial screw that prefigures the helicopter. You test small models, but none achieve sustained flight. You do not give up. You write that a man will one day know flight with a greater understanding of mechanics and materials. You are both ahead of your time and limited by it. You study optics and light. You build camera obscuras, boxes with small holes that project images onto surfaces. You note how images invert. You study how the eye sees. You dissect eyeballs, removing lenses and retinas. You write about perspective, explaining vanishing points and foreshortening. You draw shadows at different times of day to understand how light changes. You study reflections in spheres, mapping distortions. You design experiments with mirrors to bounce light. You note that colors change depending on surrounding colors. You write treatises on painting that incorporate these insights, that backgrounds should be cool in color to create depth. that shadows are never pure black, but tinged with the color of the object. You compile a treatise on painting, later called a treatise on painting, but never publish it. It will be assembled posthumously from your notes. You also explore botany. You draw plants with scientific precision. You depict their leaves, stems, and roots. You note how leaves arrange themselves on stems to maximize sun exposure, following mathematical sequences. You write about spirals in sunflowers and pine cones. You observe how trees form rings each year, indicating age. You draw cross-sections of tree trunks. You study the shapes of seeds and how they disperse. You propose a theory of botanical classification based on leaf shape and flower structure. You draw garden layouts. You design machines for crushing olives and grapes. You write about agriculture and how to improve yields. You see connections between plant growth and human health, speculating that certain plants could be medicinal. You taste herbs, noting their flavors. You become fascinated by the fact that so many plants share the same patterns you drew as a child in your fig leaf. Your scientific work is not isolated. You integrate it into your art. When painting a figure, you apply your knowledge of muscles. When shading a face, you consider how light scatters. When designing a costume, you incorporate botanical motifs. When composing a landscape, you depict realistic water flows and geological strata. Your art becomes more naturalistic because of your science. Conversely, your science becomes more beautiful because of your art. Your notebooks are filled with drawings that are both scientific diagrams and works of art. You write lyrical passages alongside measurements. You fill margins with jokes and fables. You draw monsters merging the bodies of different animals. You scribble lists of groceries next to mathematical equations. Your mind resists categorization. You are a Renaissance man, not by self-designation but by practice. With all this work, you neglect some commissions. Patrons complain. Kings send letters urging completion. You ignore some, respond to others. You are more interested in your internal deadlines. You finish some works, like St. John the Baptist, late in life. You revisit earlier works, tweaking them. You refine the Mona Lisa, making her smile more intangible. You apply glazes so thin they are almost invisible, adding depth. You intensify the background, making its rocks more eroded. You never deliver the painting to the patron. You cannot let it go. It is like a fragment of your soul on wood. After the French are expelled from Milan in 1512, you return to Florence with your followers. The city welcomes you with curiosity and suspicion. You are a celebrity. Your reputation has only grown. You are also aging. Your beard is silvered. Your hands bear the scars of years of carving and dissection. Yet you radiate youthful energy when speaking about your projects. Michelangelo, now in his 30s, is a rising star, carving the David and painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling in Rome. He is brash, passionate, and critical of your unfinished works. You, in turn, admire his sculptural mastery but consider him overly focused on the male body. The two of you represent different artistic philosophies. Michelangelo believes sculpture is the highest art because it liberates figures from stone. You believe painting is supreme because it can evoke light and atmosphere. Your rivalry fuels gossip and artistic progress. One of your main commissions during this period is a fresco in the Palazzo Vecchio. Officials want you to depict the Battle of Cassina, a Florentine victory over Pisa. Michelangelo will depict the Battle of Anghiari on the adjacent wall. The competition is intense. You design a dynamic composition. Soldiers bathing in the Arno River, surprised by an attack, scrambling to respond. You plan to experiment again with oil paint on plaster. hoping to improve on your previous fiasco. You prepare a large cartoon, drawing muscular bodies twisting, limbs entangled, water splashing. You integrate your motifs. A soldier's shield painted with a fig leaf pattern, water spiraling around legs. You begin transferring the cartoon to the wall. Michelangelo, meanwhile, produces his own cartoon filled with nude warriors. On the day of public display, crowds flock to see your drawings. You stand behind a curtain, listening to whispers. You feel pride and anxiety. Soon, however, political turmoil disrupts the project. The Medici are temporarily ousted, resources vanish, and both frescoes remain unpainted. Your cartoon is cut up and distributed among artists. Only fragments survive. It becomes legend. Artists talk about its grace and realism, lamenting its loss. During this time, you accept a commission from the Gonfalonier of Florence, Piero Soderini, to create a bronze monument to Cesare Borgia. You design an equestrian statue, similar to the one you tried in Milan. You study horses again, this time focusing on how muscles shift under fur. You dissect a horse that died in a joust, noting its leg anatomy. You design a mechanism to support the bronze weight. But before you cast, politics shifts again, and the project is cancelled. You are relieved. You never liked Borgia, whose cruelty you witnessed when working briefly for him as a military engineer. You keep the drawings for future reference. You also paint portraits during this period. One is a beautiful portrait of a young man holding a flower, sometimes identified as your lover Salai. You paint his soft features with smoky shadows, his hair falling in curls, his lips slightly curved. You insert subtle symbols, a fig leaf embroidered on his sleeve, a spiral pattern on the flower's stem. The portrait is sensual, ambiguous. Another portrait, of a woman called La Scapigliata, shows a head with loose hair, unfinished at the edges. The hair spirals like water, the face emerges from shadows. It seems like a sketch of thought itself. People argue whether it is finished or not. To you, the blurred edges suggest the infinite. The rivalry with Michelangelo intensifies when you both receive commissions to build bridges and fortifications. Michelangelo designs a bridge across the Arno. You propose a movable bridge that lifts its middle like a wing. Michelangelo ridicules your bridge as impractical. You laugh, knowing he doesn't understand hydraulics. You write snarky notes in your notebooks, calling him a spoilt marble eater. He mocks your wing obsession. Privately, you both admire each other's talents. In public, you maintain distance. Outside of art, you involve yourself in civic events. When Machiavelli, the famous Florentine diplomat and writer, plans to divert the Arno to starve Pisa, he consults you. You design earthworks, calculating the gradient needed. You and Machiavelli sit by the river, dipping sticks into the water, watching it flow. You talk about politics, human nature, and engineering. You respect Machiavelli's intellect. He respects your ability to bridge theory and practice. Ultimately, the plan fails due to bad execution, but the collaboration shows your willingness to engage in statecraft. You continue your natural studies. You collect rare plants in the Apennines. You paint studies of dragonflies, bees, and butterflies. You keep a garden outside your studio, growing herbs like basil, rosemary, and sage. You create salads from flowers and leaves, experimenting with flavors. You design a device to sprinkle seeds evenly. You draw spiraling tendrils of vines. You free caged birds. You feed stray cats. You write fables about animals that act like humans, teaching moral lessons. One fable features a fig leaf complaining about covering statues. Another features water dreaming of becoming clouds. Another features a bird that wishes to swim but cannot. You read these to children, who giggle and ask for more. Your personal life remains complex. You live with Salai and later with Melzi. Your relationships are affectionate, but complicated by jealousy and differences in maturity. You fight with Salai over his laziness and theft, but you always forgive him. You trust Melzi with your papers and heart. You mention in letters that you prefer the company of men. You never marry. You are rumored to be homosexual. The truth is that your love life remains mostly private. In 1476, during your youth, you were anonymously accused of sodomy. The charges were dismissed for lack of evidence. The incident made you cautious. You pour your emotions into art, rather than public relationships. You adopt a vegetarian diet, claiming you cannot eat animals because you love them. You wear pink and purple tunics, unusual for men, to express your individuality. You tell jokes, and sometimes insult pompous scholars. You are human. In 1513, you accept an invitation to Rome from Giuliano de' Medici, brother of the new Pope, Leo X. You are in your 60s now, your hair white, your hands slightly shaky. Rome is bustling. Michelangelo is painting the Sistine Chapel's Last Judgment. Raphael is decorating the Vatican stands. Bramante is designing St. Peter's Basilica. You arrive with Salai and Melzi, excited to be at the center of papal power. Giuliano provides you with a villa at the Vatican, a stipend, and an assistant. He expects you to work on papal engineering projects, draining swamps, building fountains, designing stage machinery. The Pope hopes you will create a system to turn worthless marshes into productive land. You begin by studying the Pontine marshes, drawing maps, calculating drainage. You design a machine to dredge silt, using screws and pumps. You propose building canals to carry water away. You experiment with models in tubs, pouring water, observing flow, adjusting angles. You write reports. Yet, the project stalls, bogged down by bureaucracy and conflicting interests. You grow frustrated. Meanwhile, you continue your scientific pursuits. You dissect cows from Roman markets, drawing their larynges and lungs. You obtain human skulls from catacombs. You dissect them, comparing their structure to your earlier observations. You examine the spina of St. Peter, the ruins of ancient structures. You measure the Pantheon, marveling at its dome. You sketch ruins with weeds growing through cracks, noting how nature reclaims man's work. You design churches with perfect proportions, incorporating leaf patterns into floor mosaics. You suggest adding spiral staircases to St. Peter's, but Bramante and Raphael ignore your suggestions. You feel sidelined by younger, more energetic artists. You also attempt to build a mirror grinding machine for telescopes. You conceive of using concave mirrors to focus light. You draw parabolic curves. You discuss these ideas with mathematician Luca Pacioli, with whom you previously collaborated on Divina Proporzione, a book about mathematical proportion. You design costumes for plays at the Vatican, including wings for actors portraying angels. You oversee the construction of mechanical stage sets that move silently, a feat of engineering. You design a machine for forging huge columns, but the papal treasurer refuses to fund it. You test a flying machine prototype by launching it from a hill outside Rome. It glides briefly, but crashes, injuring your assistant. You decide to focus on less hazardous pursuits. Your energy wanes. You fall ill with fever. You feel unappreciated. Michelangelo mocks you in public. calling you an over-the-hill painter who never finishes anything. Raphael writes flattering letters to the Pope, ensuring his dominance. You find solace in your notebooks. You write philosophical musings. As a well-spent day brings happy sleep, so a life well used brings happy death. You recall your boyhood in Vinci. You feel melancholy and resigned. You long for a place where you can work quietly without the politics of Rome. When a messenger from France arrives, bringing a letter from King Francis I inviting you to his court, you feel a spark. The king offers you a pension, a manor house, and his personal friendship. He admires your mind. He wants you to design a palace in Amboise and advise on hydraulic projects. He loves the arts and collects your paintings. You accept. You leave Rome, leaving behind unbuilt machines and unimplemented ideas. You pack your notebooks, your 3 favorite paintings, Mona Lisa, St. John the Baptist, Virgin and Child with St. Anne, your models, your clothes, and your fig leaves. You say goodbye to Michelangelo with a cordial nod. You ride north once more, crossing Alps and rivers. You are tired, but you feel hopeful. Francis's letter is like a fig leaf, small but promising, a sign of renewal. At age 65, you arrive in France. King Francis I greets you warmly at Amboise. He is tall, athletic, and enamored of Italian culture. He escorts you to Château du Clos-Lucé, your new home. It is a brick manor near his castle. It has gardens, orchards, and a chapel. It is peaceful. Francis assigns you a generous pension, a staff, and the freedom to do as you please. He visits often, asking you to tell stories of Italy and to show him your drawings. He calls you father, and you call him my king. You feel a father-son bond. He treats you with reverence. He does not pressure you to paint. Instead, he asks you to design festivals, palaces, and military defenses. He invites you to ride with him, to hunt deer. You decline the hunting, out of compassion for animals, but you ride with him to admire landscapes. You point out geological formations, cloud patterns, and river currents. He listens, fascinated. You bring with you the Mona Lisa, St. John the Baptist, and the Virgin and Child with St. Anne. Francis displays them in his private chambers, showing them proudly to visiting dignitaries. He boasts that the greatest painter in the world lives under his roof. He commissions you to design a palace at Romorantin with canals and gardens. You draw plans, grand halls, bridges, waterfalls, spiral staircases, fig leaf motifs carved into stone. Francis is enthusiastic, but the project is never built. Funds are diverted to war. You design a double helix staircase for the Château de Chambord. Your influence can be seen in its structure. 2 spiral staircases winding around each other without ever meeting, like 2 streams swirling in harmony. You consult on fortifications, improving ramparts, and designing bastions. You write treatises on rivers, suggesting ways to control floods. You teach French engineers about Italian canals. You show them your model of a flying machine. They marvel, but cannot imagine building it. As you settle in, you make Clos-Lucé your laboratory. You set up workshops in barns, building models of bridges, water wheels, and flying machines. You plant a vegetable garden with fig trees. You watch their leaves, comparing them to your childhood leaf. You test different fertilizers. You draw the spirals of snail shells in the garden. You craft mechanical lions for court festivals that open their chests to release lilies, France's emblem. You write fables in French for Francis's children. You tell them a story about a fig leaf that travels the world, another about a spiral that uncoils. Another about a bird that chooses to stay on the ground because it loves the earth. The children laugh. You laugh with them, feeling the joy of connecting across generations. Your assistant Francesco Melzi is now like a son. He manages your correspondence, organizes your notes, and cares for your health. He dresses your wounds when you fall. He brings you tea and bread when your hands shake too much to pour. Salai occasionally visits, but he is mostly in Milan. Your circle of acquaintances includes French artists, Italian expatriates, and scholars. You discuss philosophy with them, quoting Aristotle and your own observations. You attend Mass in the chapel, listening to hymns. You design altarpieces, though you no longer paint them. You compose music on your lyre, your fingers slower but still nimble. You write to your half-brothers in Vinci, forgiving old disputes. You send money to your stepmother. You send 2 fig leaves, pressed between pages as tokens of memory. You often sit by your window, watching birds in the garden. You study how pigeons fold their wings when landing, how swallows swoop, how gulls glide effortlessly by adjusting wing curvature. You doodle new designs for gliders in the margins of your notes. You imagine building a platform on the nearby hill to test a machine. But your body is weaker. You realize you cannot risk injury. You resign yourself to never flying, but you remain fascinated by the physics of lift. You read about mathematicians in Germany who are studying mechanics. You think about writing to them, but you procrastinate. Instead, you write a fable about a man who spends his life watching birds, dreaming of flight, content with the dream. In the gardens, you hold court with King Francis. He walks with you, arm in arm. You discuss art and science. You tell him about your youth in Vinci. He asks about your greatest regret. You mention that you wish you had published your findings on anatomy and water. He promises to help after your death. You talk about God, nature, and the soul. You tell him that to understand nature is to worship God. He nods. He is devout yet curious. You discuss war machines. You confess that you would rather design bridges than cannons. He laughs. He agrees. He plans to end wars by building such beautiful things that no one wants to destroy them. You smile skeptically. As years pass, your health declines. You suffer strokes that paralyze your right hand. You adapt, drawing with your left. You write less. You dictate to Melzi. You sleep longer. You feel pain in your joints. You walk with a cane. You still, however, observe. You watch how Francis's court dresses. You note the spiral patterns in their brocade. You sniff perfumes, identifying herbs. You taste new cheeses, describing their textures. You listen to lute players, noting how their fingers pluck strings. You hum along. You feel alive in small moments. You think of your life as a series of observations strung together by curiosity. One afternoon in 1518, Francis brings you a fig leaf. He found it while hunting. He places it in your hand. It is bright green, veins clear, edges serrated. You run your finger along the veins. You show him your own dried leaf from Vinci, now brown and fragile. You place them side by side on a table, old and new, Italy and France. You say, "See, the pattern is the same. Life repeats itself. What we learn from one leaf applies to all leaves." He nods. He asks about the spiral of water. You pour water into a bowl and swirl it with a spoon. You watch the vortex form. You discuss how spirals appear in nature, in shells, storms, galaxies. He listens, eyes wide. You say, "Everything is connected by simple laws. Even our lives spiral. We think we move in straight lines, but we often return to the same questions." You glance at your wing drawings. And wings? He asks. You open a notebook, showing him your earliest sketch of a frog from Vinci. You flip the page to a wing. I've been thinking about flight my whole life, you say. Perhaps someone else will succeed, but the dream has shaped my actions. He places his hand on yours. Your dream has given us all wings, he says. Your final months are quiet. You sign your will on April 23, 1519. You designate Melzi as your heir, leaving him your paintings, notes, and funds. You leave vineyards to Salai. You specify that you wish to be buried in the Church of St. Florentin. You ask for 60 beggars to follow your coffin. You instruct Francis to keep your works safe. You make peace with your family. You confess your sins, though they are few. You write a note. I have offended God and mankind, because my work did not reach the quality it should have. You fold the note and place it in a drawer. On May 1st you feel feverish. You call Melzi. You ask him to read you your own fable about the spiral. He does. You smile. You close your eyes. Francis hears of your illness and rushes to close Lucé. He arrives on May 2nd. According to legend, he holds you as you die. Whether or not he holds you physically, he holds you in esteem. You whisper to him about a fig leaf you found by a puddle, about a spiral of water, about wings. You mention that you see a light. He presses your hand. Your breath slows. You inhale one last time, filling your lungs with the scent of roses. You exhale. You are gone. Leonardo da Vinci's death in 1519 does not silence him. His notebooks, left to Melzi, contain thousands of pages of drawings and writings. After Melzi's death, the codices scatter like seeds, some lost, some sold to collectors, some hidden in libraries. Centuries pass before they are fully appreciated. When scholars read his mirror script and piece together his notes, they are astonished. They find accurate descriptions of muscles, tendons, and organs decades before modern anatomy, designs for machines that prefigure helicopters, tanks, and bicycles, studies of optics that anticipate cameras, theories of geology that challenge biblical timelines, drawings of water swirling exactly as fluid dynamics describes. Leonardo emerges not just as a painter, but as a scientist and engineer whose curiosity knew no bounds. King Francis keeps the Mona Lisa. It hangs in French palaces for centuries before moving to the Louvre. Visitors are drawn to her smile, trying to unravel its meaning. They do not know that behind the smile lies a lifetime of observation: frogs, leaves, spirals, wings. They do not know that the man who painted her scribbled notes about the turbulence of water in the margins of her portrait. The Last Supper decays, yet it remains revered. Copies preserve its composition. Pilgrims still visit the refectory in Milan, standing in silence before the faded mural. They see Christ's hand reaching for bread, the apostles reacting. They feel the same tension Leonardo felt on a scaffold at midnight. Leonardo's influence permeates art. His sfumato technique becomes a hallmark of Renaissance painting. His studies of proportion inform artists for generations. His interest in the human form encourages others to study anatomy. Michelangelo and Raphael respect him, even as they rival him. The interplay among them pushes art forward. In engineering and science, he is rediscovered. His designs inspire the construction of the first helicopters and parachutes. His observations of heart valves influence cardiology. His idea that fossils are remnants of ancient animals influences geology. His method of combining empirical observation with imagination presages the scientific method. Scientists and artists alike cite him as an inspiration. In popular imagination, Leonardo becomes a mythic figure, a symbol of human potential. He embodies the idea that one person can excel in many fields, bridging art and science. He becomes the Renaissance man, a shorthand for polymath. But he was also a man of his time, illegitimate, self-taught, reliant on patrons, subject to the whims of dukes and kings. He struggled with incomplete projects, self-doubt, and physical ailments. He sought perfection and rarely found it. He was generous, playful, secretive, at times contradictory. He loved animals, sometimes wore pink, wrote backwards, and used his left hand proudly. He was uniquely himself. As we end this long journey, we return to that moment in Clos Lucé. The old man sits by the window, a fig leaf in his hand. He turns it, tracing its veins. He remembers a frog's leap. He hears the spiral of water in a stream. He imagines wings. He feels the warmth of the sun on his face. He is content. He knows he will not finish everything. He knows that the pursuit, not the completion, is the joy. He closes his eyes, and in his mind's eye he sees the world as interconnected patterns: leaves, water, wings, spirals. He feels a kinship with all of nature. He smiles gently, a smile like the Mona Lisa's, ambiguous and rich. Then he sleeps. And so the boy from Vinci takes his final rest. But if you wish to walk other quiet roads of history, the hearth of Stone Sleeper Stories waits for you. Subscribe, and when next you close your eyes, another journey will be ready to carry you into sleep. To truly convey the depth of your Tuscan childhood, we must slow down and linger among the hills, fields, and vineyards that shaped your earliest impressions. Imagine waking to the dawn chorus of birds every morning, their trills and chirps layered like counterpoint melodies. The air at sunrise is cool and damp. Dew clings to cobwebs strung between fennel stems, turning them into chains of diamonds. You rise from your straw pallet, tiptoe past sleeping siblings, and slip outside. Barefoot, you cross the courtyard, feeling dust and pebbles underfoot, and wander down to the stream. Mist rises off the water, swirling in tiny spirals as the first light warms it. You squat and cup your hands, scooping up the cold, clear water, tasting its metallic tang. In the distance, roosters crow, and the bells of the village church toll a simple melody that marks the Angelus. In moments like this, you sense time stretching. Each second seems slower, each sound distinct. You are alone with the frogs, the reeds, and your thoughts. You notice a dragonfly darting above the water. Its transparent wings glint like glass. You try to follow its flight with your eyes, fascinated by how it can hover in place, and then dart suddenly. The dragonfly becomes an early teacher. You realize that flight requires not just power, but also control and balance. Back home, after chores, you find yourself drawn to your grandfather's stories. He sits by the hearth, smoke curling up the chimney, telling tales of Etruscan kings and Roman generals, of saints and miracles. His voice is gravelly but kind, and his hands, calloused from years of labor, gesture as he speaks. You listen, absorbing the rhythm of his speech, the cadence of his pauses. You imagine the scenes he describes: chariots racing, battles on plains, martyrs enduring. You begin to realize that stories can hold power, that narratives shape how people understand the world. You start to see your own life as a story that you might one day tell, or that others may tell about you. This awareness plants a seed of introspection. Later, when you write in your notebooks, you will not only record observations but also craft parables and fables, giving animals voices and plants feelings. Your grandfather's storytelling invites you to blend fact and fiction, observation and imagination. Perhaps it is he who first unknowingly teaches you the value of motifs. He repeats certain phrases, returns to certain symbols, and delights in how repetition deepens meaning. Your relationship with Katerina, your mother, is tender but brief. She lives in a nearby village, and you visit her every so often. When you do, she embraces you with arms that smell of yeast and rosemary. She bakes bread in a wood-fired oven, and shows you how to knead dough, how to judge when it has risen sufficiently, how to test if it is baked by tapping the crust. She hums while working, her voice a low drone that vibrates through your bones. She teaches you that patience yields reward. If you rush the dough, it will not rise properly. If you wait, it will double in size. This lesson echoes years later in your art. Glazes must dry before the next coat. Ideas must simmer before you can set them down. Katerina also teaches you to pay attention to smells. She tells you that bread is ready when it smells of nuts and caramel, that rain is coming when the air smells of earth, that love can be detected in the way someone's scent lingers. You internalize these sensory cues. They influence your color choices, the way you describe textures in your writings, the way you depict fabrics and skin. Throughout your childhood, the Tuscan seasons imprint their rhythms on you. Spring brings fields of poppies so red they seem aflame. You pick a poppy and examine its delicate petals, so thin you can see veins. The petals remind you of the fig leaf structure, only softer. You sketch the poppy, noting how its petals overlap in a spiral pattern. Summer arrives with cicadas that drone incessantly, filling the heat-thick air with their buzzing. You lie in the shade of an olive tree, listening, drawing spirals in dust with a stick. You watch swallows flying in and out of the barn, feeding their young in mud nests. You wonder how they navigate in near darkness. Autumn brings grape harvests. The town turns into a festival. Men and women tread grapes in large tubs, laughing as purple juice stains their feet. You are allowed to help, and the sensation of grapes squishing between your toes thrills you. You see the grape skins floating in spirals in the barrel. You taste the must, sweet and warm. The smell of fermentation will later remind you of oil paint mixing. Winter strips the hills bare and brings frost. You draw patterns of frost on the glass. You watch how ice crystals, like fig leaves, branch in fractal patterns. You huddle by the fire, carving wooden toys, and dream of warmth and light. As you grow older, you start building things. Your father's workshop has scraps of wood, leather straps, bits of metal. You gather these like a magpie. You fashion a small cart with wooden wheels and attach a string to pull it. You design a simple crossbow that fires sticks. You create a rudimentary pulley system to lift a bucket. You are not content to merely draw animals. You want to animate them. You carve a bird with articulated wings attached to a crank. When you turn the crank, the wings flap. It is crude, but the motion delights you. You understand that an idea can exist in your mind and become tangible with your hands. This realization is intoxicating. You begin to think of yourself not just as an observer, but as a creator. When a neighbor's mill breaks, you propose a solution to fix the wheel. The adults laugh at first, then try your suggestion. It works. They look at you with new respect. You feel pride. This early mechanical problem-solving presages your later engineering feats. One day you wander farther from home than ever before. Following a stream into a wooded valley, you encounter a cave. It yawns dark and cool, its entrance fringed with moss. You feel both fear and curiosity. You debate whether to enter. You imagine monsters and treasures. Your heart pounds. After a moment, curiosity wins. You step inside, feeling the temperature drop, hearing water drip. You light a small piece of dry reed as a torch. You explore the cave's recesses, seeing stalactites hanging like stone icicles. You find fossils embedded in walls, shells and fish imprints. They puzzle you. How did sea creatures get into a mountain? You pick a fossil, slip it into your pocket along with your fig leaf. This experience ignites your interest in geology. You will later write about fossils on mountains as evidence of ancient seas. The cave itself becomes a metaphor. You recall it when descending into cadavers, into the unknown, guided by a flickering light of inquiry. Your father notices your drawings and keeps them. He shows them to his friends, who nod approvingly. He arranges for you to apprentice with Andrea del Verrocchio, not only because of talent, but also because of social obligation. The decision is pragmatic, to secure your future. Yet, deep down, your father recognizes a quality in you that he never had: an insatiable appetite for knowledge. He gives you space to explore, within the constraints of his world. He sometimes scolds you for losing track of time while drawing, but he never forbids you. When you ask him questions about how contracts are structured or why people argue about property lines, he answers patiently. You learn from him the importance of clear communication, which will later influence your note-taking. He teaches you that precision matters, in law as in art. As an illegitimate son, you are grateful that he acknowledges you at all. Many men would have ignored a child conceived out of wedlock. His acceptance of you plants a seed of confidence. Florence in your teenage years offers a sensory panorama unmatched by rural Vinci. Walking through its bustling streets, you discover a symphony of smells: the acrid tang of fresh-tanned leather, the sweet aroma of honeycakes sold by bakers, the pungent scent of dye vats brewing deep blues and oranges. The city is alive with commerce, culture, and competition. Every doorway holds a story. You pause before the workshop of a goldsmith, mesmerized by how he hammers thin sheets of metal into delicate filigree. You ask him how long it took to master his craft. He laughs and says, "A lifetime, and I'm still learning." You nod. The words resonate. You peek into a weaver's studio and watch women throw shuttles across looms, creating cloth patterned with spirals and leaves. You recognize the motifs. You feel an affinity. You see masons on scaffolding chiseling ornate capitals for columns. Marble chips scatter like snow. The sound is sharp, rhythmic. You memorize it. Later, as you carve wood and marble, that rhythm guides your hands. In Verrocchio's workshop, you begin to form friendships beyond mere collegiality. One apprentice, Tommaso, comes from a family of stonemasons. He teaches you how to read stone, to know which direction a piece will split, to sense hidden flaws. Over lunch, he tells tales of his father carving baptistery doors. Another apprentice, Lucrezia, works quietly in a corner, painting miniatures. She speaks little, but you admire her steady hand. One evening you watch her paint a tiny portrait of a child. She uses a single hairbrush. The child's eyes shine. You lean over and ask how she gets such detail. She smiles and invites you to try. You realize that even the smallest works demand patience and precision. These interactions broaden your understanding of art. It is not a solitary endeavor. It is a community of shared techniques and stories. Your evenings in Florence are full of exploration. After the workshop closes, you wander to the Piazza della Signoria, where merchants and street performers gather. A man with a trained monkey draws crowds. The monkey dances and collects coins. You sketch the monkey's movements, capturing its agile leaps. Nearby, a storyteller recounts the myths of Greek gods. You listen, intrigued by tales of Icarus and Daedalus, father and son who attempted flight with wings of feathers and wax. You shiver at the part where the wax melts and Icarus falls. The cautionary tale pricks at your dream. You wonder, could wings be built differently to prevent such a fate? You walk to the Arno's banks at sunset. The river reflects the pink and gold of the sky. Boats drift by, oars dipping in and out. Children play near the bridge, skipping stones. You sit and sketch the reflections, noting how ripples distort the arches of the Ponte Vecchio. You stay until twilight, until stars appear, until the lamps of the city flicker on. Life in the bottega is not all work. There is humor and mischief. Salai steals your paint and replaces it with mud. You chase him, he hides, you laugh, you forgive. You play pranks on other apprentices. You tie their aprons to chairs or swap their brushes. Laughter echoes through the high-ceilinged room. Verrocchio tolerates the mischief as long as work gets done. On feast days he provides wine and roasted meats. Apprentices sing songs, reciting poems. You bring out your silver lute and play. The notes resonate in the workshop, mixing with the smell of oil and wood shavings. Music becomes a respite, a way to express emotions you cannot put into words. You start composing melodies that later influence the rhythms of your brushstrokes. The interplay between notes and lines fascinates you. You think, there is harmony in both. Your learning extends to philosophy and mathematics. You befriend a young mathematician named Luca, who introduces you to Euclidean geometry. He explains the concept of proofs, how each statement builds logically on the previous. He draws triangles and circles, showing how proportions relate. You realize that geometry underlies perspective. You practice drawing cubes and pyramids from various angles, using vanishing points. You experiment with placing human figures inside geometric solids to ensure correct proportions. This mathematical foundation later allows you to create compositions that feel balanced and credible. You also read ancient texts, translations of Plato, Aristotle, and Vitruvius. You are particularly struck by Vitruvius's idea that a building should be like a human body, harmoniously proportioned. You think about how the human body can be inscribed in a circle and a square, connecting microcosm and macrocosm. You will later illustrate this idea in your Vitruvian Man drawing. During your early 20s, the plague sweeps through parts of Italy. Florence imposes quarantines. Streets empty. Fear spreads faster than the disease. You witness people with swollen lymph nodes, coughing, wheezing. You feel a mixture of horror and scientific curiosity. You draw the afflicted from afar, noting the discoloration of skin. You write in your notebook, fear quickens the pulse, knowledge calms it. You dream of designing hospitals with better ventilation and of creating protective clothing for physicians. This experience influences your later designs of a diving suit and a hazmat-like outfit. It also deepens your compassion. You become more committed to using your skills for human benefit, not just for entertainment or war. Towards the end of your apprenticeship, you receive your first independent commission, an altarpiece for a small chapel. The client is modest, but you pour your heart into the work. You depict a Madonna and Child flanked by saints. You apply everything you have learned. Careful perspective, realistic drapery, lifelike faces. You design a background with a winding river that glints like a spiral. You hide a fig leaf motif in the border. When the painting is installed, the patrons weep. They say the faces look alive, that they expect the Christ child to coo. Your reputation grows. You realize that your art can evoke strong emotions. This knowledge is both humbling and intoxicating. You are no longer just an apprentice. You are an artist in your own right. Yet you know you have much more to learn. You feel the pull of new challenges. Before leaving Florence for Milan, you seek blessings from local saints. You visit the shrine of San Miniato al Monte, climbing the long stairway to the Romanesque church perched above the city. From there you look out over Florence. The dome dominates, the Arno glistens, the Tuscan hills fade into blue. You kneel and pray silently, not for wealth or fame, but for the wisdom to follow your curiosity wherever it leads. You tuck your fig leaf inside your cloak. Near your heart, you whisper, "Nature, guide me." You stand, breathe deeply, and head down the steps. The road north awaits. When you return to Florence after years in Milan, the city feels both familiar and foreign. The political climate has shifted. The Medici have been temporarily ousted. Savonarola has preached fiery sermons about vanity and sin. Bonfires of the vanities have consumed artworks and books. People whisper about the end of days. You who thrive on beauty and inquiry find the austerity oppressive. Yet you are commissioned to produce works that celebrate triumph and glory. You walk through streets where children once played, now filled with ash. You smell burned paint. You decide your art will resist despair by capturing complexity and nuance. Working on the adoration of the Magi, you lose yourself in research. You visit the Franciscan library to study descriptions of Eastern kings. You consult traders for details on fabrics, spices, and animals from distant lands. You interview travelers about how Persians braid their horses' manes. You incorporate these details into your composition. Each figure becomes a microstory, each face a world of emotion. You draw dozens of horses in different poses, layering them into a single swirling mass. You spend nights reworking a hand, an ear, a drapery fold. You scribble notes in the margins. Observe how the neck veins swell when horses strain. You include a small boy in the corner staring at the scene with wide eyes. He is you, the curious observer. You hide your motifs. A fig leaf carved into a column, a spiral pattern in a turban, an angel with faintly visible wings. The monks are impatient. You try to speed up, but your hand stops. You cannot ignore a flaw once you see it. Days become months. The monks visit again, concerned. They ask when it will be finished. You sigh. You realize that your curiosity has once again expanded beyond the boundaries of the commission. You are drawn away by other opportunities. The painting remains in its early stages. Yet, the underdrawing captures something raw and dynamic, as if the scene is still moving. Those who see it years later will marvel at its energy. While planning the Battle of Anghiari, you delve into war's chaos. You interview veterans, asking them how horses rear when wounded, how soldiers grab each other's hair in combat, how flags ripple in wind. You watch sparring matches at the barracks. You draw muscles stretched in exertion, faces twisted in rage, hands clutching swords. You choreograph the battle like a dance, mapping the ebb and flow of conflict. You write in your notebook, "Great is the courage needed to paint this." You design a new technique to apply paint, mixing wax with pigment and applying it to the wall, then using heat to fuse it. You test it on a small panel. It works. You move to the wall. You light a brazier underneath. The heat is uneven. The pigments begin to run. You panic. You try to control the melt. You fail. You step back, devastated. You realize that innovation involves risk. The wax drips down the wall like tears. You decide to abandon the fresco. Others call you fickle. You call yourself bold. The cartoon remains as proof of your vision, a blueprint of movement. During this period, you form a complex friendship with Niccolò Machiavelli, the cunning statesman and author. He visits your studio, intrigued by your machines. He sees your sketches of war devices, giant scythes attached to wagons, armored vehicles with rotating cannons. He asks about their effectiveness. You discuss the ethics of inventing such weapons. You confess that you designed them only to avoid building them. He smiles, understanding. He shows you drafts of his treatise, The Prince. You read his observations on power. You argue that leadership should be guided by reason and compassion. He counters that human nature is fickle. The two of you debate philosophy into the night, drinking wine, the candles burning low. He leaves with new metaphors. You write down ideas about political machines. You also return to the Arno River to study its course. You trace its meanders, noting where it floods. You propose building levees and canals. You design sluice gates with screws to regulate water levels. You calculate flow rates using experiments, releasing dye into the river, and measuring how long it takes to travel between markers. You write, the Arno is like an unruly child. It needs guidance, not force. The city council listens politely, but declines your plan. Years later, engineers will implement similar measures. Your most intimate artistic journey during this arc is painting the Mona Lisa. You invite Lisa Gherardini to sit for you. She arrives with her husband, who is proud to commission a portrait. Lisa wears a dark dress and a thin veil. She smiles politely, then becomes serious. You seat her in your studio, adjust the light, place your fig leaf, now extremely fragile, on a nearby table for inspiration. You begin with sketches, capturing the tilt of her head, the arch of her brow, the subtle transition from cheek to lip. You ask her about her children, her garden, her favorite foods. She answers shyly. As she speaks, her expression changes. Affection when mentioning her son, sadness when thinking of a deceased daughter. You watch these micro-expressions and later attempt to capture them all in one composite smile. You paint slowly, layering glazes. You set aside the painting and return to it months later, adjusting the corners of her mouth by a hair. You plan a landscape behind her, with winding rivers and roads leading to misty mountains. You place a bridge in the distance. You realize that the landscape mirrors your own journey. Roads of curiosity, rivers of thought, mountains of knowledge. You include a spiral pattern in the water's eddy. You subtly shade the veil to resemble wings. You paint her hands resting gently, her fingers long and slender, each knuckle rendered with care. You include small details, a faint line of a leaf pattern on her bodice, a gleam of moisture on her lower lip. You look at her and see a person, a mother, a woman with thoughts and secrets. You also see a symbol, the union of human and nature. You will never deliver this painting. It becomes a companion that travels with you. It is not unfinished. It is ever evolving. When you leave Florence again, you do so with a heavy heart. You love this city, its markets, its artists, its river. You are also tired of its politics. You pack your bags, placing the Mona Lisa carefully between pillows, wrapping your cartoon of the battle for preservation, tucking your fig leaf into your codex. You say goodbye to your brother-in-law, your clients, your friends. You mount your horse and ride out. The city's silhouettes fade. The road north opens. You feel relief and sadness. You know you may never live permanently in Florence again. You whisper farewell to Brunelleschi's dome, to the Arno's waters, to the chapel where you prayed. You look ahead to a land of courts, wars, inventions. You feel alive. Your second period in Milan, under French rule, presents a different cultural atmosphere. The court at Milan is now governed by Louis XII's Lieutenant Charles d'Amboise, a cultured man who speaks Italian and appreciates art. He gives you autonomy to run large projects. With a new patron, you must re-establish trust, proving your loyalty while maintaining independence. You write letters praising the French king's wisdom and generosity. You present him with a silver lute shaped like a horse's head, playing melodies that mix Tuscan folk tunes with French chansons. The court listens, enchanted. Charles d'Amboise invites you to design a pageant to celebrate a royal marriage. You conceive of a procession of planets. Floats representing Mercury, Venus, and Mars glide through the streets, each with actors dressed as deities. You design mechanical devices to animate the planets. Gears and pulleys make them rotate slowly, while hidden musicians play hymns. You hide your motifs in the costumes. A fig leaf embroidered on Venus's gown, spiral patterns on Saturn's ring, wings on Mercury's shoes. The pageant dazzles the audience. You see smiles, tears, wide eyes. You feel satisfaction that your artistry can unite engineering and storytelling. Meanwhile, you continue to pursue the equestrian statue. After the French destroy your clay model, you consider abandoning the project, but pride and duty compel you to attempt it again. You carve a smaller wax model. You experiment with different alloys of bronze, testing their strength and fluidity. You design a furnace large enough to melt hundreds of kilograms of metal. You instruct workers on building molds. You draw diagrams of heat distribution. The technical difficulties are immense. You consult with blacksmiths and foundry workers. You hold meetings in which you discuss the best fuel mixture, the proper thickness of walls to prevent cracks. You record these discussions in your notebooks. Ultimately, politics and war intervene. The full casting never happens. The clay model remains your largest horse. You feel a mixture of relief and regret. Relief because you are free to pursue other interests. Regret because you crave the challenge. In your free time, you explore the Lombardy countryside. You wander along canals you designed decades earlier, watching boats pass through locks. You talk to farmers about water management. You visit vineyards and taste wines with different mineral profiles, noting how soil affects flavor. You attend church services where organ music fills the vaulted spaces. You pay attention to the acoustics, noticing how sound reverberates. You draw sketches of organ pipes and consider how to build a portable organ. You design a drum machine that can play rhythms automatically. You dream of building a music hall where water and wind power instruments. You write songs about rivers and birds. You hum them in your studio as you paint. When you paint The Last Supper, your days are long and solitary. You arrive at the refectory early, before the monks eat breakfast. You climb the scaffolding in silence. The dining hall smells of bread, wine, and wax. You place your palette, brushes, and pigments within reach. You stand back, studying the wall. You plan your brushstrokes. You imagine the apostles' personalities. Peter, impulsive; John, tender; Thomas, doubting; Judas, conflicted. You channel these emotions into your paint. You work one small area at a time. A hand, a sleeve, a loaf of bread. You talk to yourself softly, reciting scripture and your own commentary. When monks enter to set tables, you pause, greet them, and sometimes ask them to pose. You note how light from the windows shifts throughout the day, altering shadows. You adjust your tones accordingly. You eat a simple lunch, cheese, bread, olives. Then you continue. At dusk, you descend, gather your things, and leave. On the walk home, you review the day's work in your mind. You consider what to change tomorrow. Your nights are filled with dreams of overlapping hands, swirling drapery, food, betrayal, love. In your dreams, the apostles whisper secrets. You wake, jot down ideas, and integrate them into the painting. The process is exhausting, but exhilarating. When the mural is unveiled, the reaction confirms that your dedication was worthwhile. You also design and stage entertainments for the court. In one festival, you create a mechanical dragon that breathes fire. Hidden bellows blow powdered resin through flames, producing sparks. The dragon moves on hidden wheels. Courtiers gasp. You relish their awe. You design costumes with complex mechanisms. A dress that opens to reveal a fountain. A hat that unfurls like a flower. You test each device meticulously. Failures amuse you. You once accidentally set a costume on fire. The actor screams. You douse it with water. Everyone laughs. You learn to balance ambition with safety. You become the court's master of ceremonies, the man who makes dreams happen. Your time in Milan also brings heartbreak. In 1506, your father dies. You receive news from Vinci by courier. You sit quietly, remembering him teaching you to tie your first cravat, showing you legal documents. You feel remorse for not visiting more. You write to your brothers, offering condolences and asking for your portion of inheritance. They resist. You fight legal battles, trying to secure property that your illegitimacy complicates. Eventually, you receive a small plot of land and a vineyard. You reflect on lineage and identity. You wonder whether your own creative legacy will be recognized, or whether your notebooks will be scattered. You resolve to entrust them to Melzi when the time comes. With each passing year, your scientific curiosity deepens. It becomes an almost spiritual practice. When you take a body apart, you feel you are entering sacred ground. You approach the cadaver with respect, whispering a prayer. You wash your hands, sharpen your scalpel. You make careful incisions, peeling back skin to reveal muscle. You separate muscles to reveal nerves. You draw each layer before moving deeper. You talk to the body, thanking it for teaching you. You jot notes about texture, color, smell. You compare old bodies to young, male to female, healthy to diseased. You note differences in fat distribution, muscle tone, organ size. You discover new things. You are the first to accurately draw the female reproductive system. You observe arteries branching like tree limbs. You see veins forming a network like vines. You recall your fig leaf and smile. You realize nature repeats patterns across scales. You feel awe. You feel sadness when you see disease ravaging organs. You write, "Anatomy is the key to understanding the soul's house." Your nights in the morgue are cold and lonely. You light candles to chase shadows. Rats scurry. The smell of decay hangs in the air. You hum quietly to calm yourself. Sometimes you bring a friend, a medical student named Marcantonio. He holds lanterns and hands you instruments. He asks questions. You answer patiently. You teach him that observation precedes theory. You tell him to draw what he sees, not what he thinks he should see. You show him how nerves branch like lightning. He is grateful. He writes in his diary about the honor of learning from you. Years later, he will become a physician who credits you with shaping his method. When you study water, you immerse yourself, sometimes literally. You wade into rivers up to your knees, feeling currents tug at your shins. You drop colored powders into eddies, watching how they swirl and dissipate. You toss pebbles and note how ripples propagate. You build small wooden channels and pour water at different speeds to observe laminar versus turbulent flow. You cut cross-sections of rivers in your mind, drawing them on paper. You invent words to describe vortices and swirling patterns. You write about the moment when water falls into a hole and spins faster and faster, forming a funnel. You compare this to the funnel of a tornado, to the shape of a snail shell. You create analogies. Water is the blood of the earth. As the blood circulates through veins, so water circulates through rivers. You draw diagrams of river basins, labeling tributaries as capillaries. Your writing becomes poetic and scientific simultaneously. Your research on flight leads you to befriend falconers. You ask to hold their birds. You run your fingers along feathers, noting how the edges are serrated to reduce drag. You study how birds preen, realigning their feathers after flight. You time how long it takes a hawk to ascend from a perch to a certain height. You measure wingspans and body weight. You compare the ratio of wing surface area to body mass. You deduce that humans are too heavy to be lifted by wings of a manageable size with muscle alone. This realization disappoints you, but you do not give up. You pivot to gliders. You design a glider with canvas stretched over a wooden frame. You test a small model, launching it from a window. It glides gracefully to the ground. You scribble excitedly. Success! You imagine scaling it up. You write to your friend Count Boccaccio, asking if he knows a tall hill from which you might test a glider. He suggests Monte Cesare, near Fiesole, outside Florence. You smile, remembering your youth. You never build the full-scale glider, but your notes survive. In 2010, engineers will construct a glider from your design and prove it flies. You also pursue acoustics. You design experiments with organ pipes, varying their lengths, and observing pitch changes. You build a string instrument with adjustable tension, measuring how pitch changes with tension and length. You write formulas relating frequency to string length, centuries before physicists formalized them. You design horns that amplify sound, inspired by how shells magnify the roar of the ocean. You think about how to build rooms that enhance speech intelligibility. You propose curved ceilings and walls angled to reflect sound to listeners. You design theaters. You draw cross-sections showing how sound waves bounce. You write, "Music is the shaping of time. Architecture is the shaping of space. Both rely on proportion." You design a water organ that uses water pressure to push air through pipes. You imagine a concert in a garden, water music floating over roses. During this arc, you become increasingly introspective. In your notebooks, you write aphorisms. Iron rusts from disuse. Water does not. Likewise, the mind. Learning never exhausts the mind. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Experience does not err. Only our judgments err. You scribble these between drawings of hearts and hydrangeas. You write about your faith. You believe in a creator who reveals himself in nature. You criticize those who rely solely on books. You urge people to look at the world. You note how some scholars mock you for lacking formal education. You reply that you have studied under the greatest teacher, experience. You write, "Those who fall in love with practice without science are like sailors who board a ship without rudder and compass." You call for a union of theory and practice. You admit your own ignorance repeatedly. This humility endears you to some, puzzles others. Back in Florence after Rome's upheaval, you find a city changed but familiar. Michelangelo's David stands in the Piazza della Signoria, gleaming white, muscular, defiant. Crowds gather to admire it. Some whisper that Michelangelo is the new genius. You walk around the statue, studying its proportions. You see the perfection of anatomy, the tension in muscles, the fearless gaze. You feel admiration mixed with competitiveness. You think, I could have carved such a figure had I focused on sculpture. But you are drawn to different challenges. You nod respectfully when you see Michelangelo. He scowls. He is guarded. You do not engage. Later you write privately, Michelangelo is the envy of sculptors, yet he lacks grace. He, in turn, says you are a mere draftsman who never finishes. The rivalry fuels gossip, but it also pushes both of you to excel. You pour your energy into painting, he into sculpture. During this period, you receive letters from patrons complaining about your delays. One from Isabella d'Este cheats you gently. Maestro, she writes, it has been years since I sat for my portrait. Might I see a finished work before I am old? You chuckle. You open her half-finished portrait. Her eyes peer back at you, intelligent, proud. You feel a pang of guilt. You pick up your brush and add a few more strokes. Then you set it aside again. You promise yourself to finish it soon. You never will. The portrait remains in your studio, a testament to the limits of your time. You begin a painting of Leda and the Swan, a mythological subject that fascinates you. You sketch Leda in various poses, standing, kneeling, reclining. You draw swans from life, visiting ponds at the edge of the city. You note how their wings wrap protectively around their bodies. You incorporate your motifs. Leda's hair swirling like water, the swan's wings curved like fig leaves. The painting becomes sensual, controversial. You fear backlash. You eventually destroy it or give it away. Its exact fate is unknown, yet the sketches survive, showing your continual exploration of natural forms. You design a carnival float for a civic festival. The float represents the triumph of art over ignorance. It features a giant figure of wisdom holding a torch. At wisdom's feet are sculpted fools chasing their own tails. You design mechanical puppets that perform a play. Two fools argue until they are led to wisdom and enlightened. Crowds cheer. You hide a fig leaf pattern on wisdom's robe, a spiral in the torch flame, and tiny wings on the fools' hats. You laugh privately at these Easter eggs. The float is a success. Afterwards, children come to your studio, asking to see the puppets. You show them. You love their wonder. You host gatherings at your home, where artists, philosophers, and scientists meet. You cook vegetarian meals, serving salads of herbs and nuts. You play your lute. You read aloud from Dante and Petrarch. You discuss topics ranging from the immortality of the soul to the mechanics of catapults. Your guests include painters like Perugino, sculptors like Sansovino, poets like Michelangelo's friend Vittoria Colonna. Conversations are lively. Voices overlap. Wine flows. You tell jokes. You propose building a new academy to teach drawing and perspective to young artists. The idea floats around but is not realized until long after your death. Still, seeds are planted. At this stage, your relationship with Melzi deepens. He is not just your assistant, he is your confidant, your friend, perhaps a surrogate son. You teach him everything: drawing, perspective, anatomy, engineering. He learns quickly. He brings you food when you forget to eat. He listens when you rant about politics or Michelangelo. He copies your notes, making them legible to others. You entrust him with your codices, instructing him to keep them safe. You know that Salai cannot be trusted with your legacy. He is too flighty. Melzi is loyal. He will later preserve your manuscripts. You write him letters filled with affection and gratitude. He replies with respect and love. When you arrive in Rome, you find the city swirling with artists and ambition. The Vatican Palace thrums with activity. Michelangelo sculpts Moses, paint splattered and hammer swinging. Raphael oversees teams of assistants painting frescoes of philosophers and theologians. Bramante's plans for St. Peter's are on every tongue. You, older and slower, feel both exhilaration and overwhelmed. You set up your studio in the Belvedere courtyard. You unpack your models, your paintings, your books. You greet acquaintances. You meet the Pope, who looks at you with curiosity. He compliments the Mona Lisa. You feel a flicker of pride. You attend the unveiling of the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Michelangelo stands, arms crossed, paint on his clothes. You tilt your head back and behold the frescoes. God creating Adam, prophets, sibyls, scenes of humanity falling and being redeemed. You feel tears in your eyes. The colors, the foreshortening, the anatomical detail, it is staggering. You realize Michelangelo has reached a summit of painting. You are not jealous. You are inspired. You return to your studio and paint a study of a head, using softer transitions, experimenting with cooler colors. You consider how to portray the divine. You write in your notebook, "One must learn from others even when in competition." Your work in Rome often feels like pushing against molasses. The bureaucracy is thick. Cardinals are cautious. You propose dredging the Tiber to prevent flooding. The project stalls. You design a machine for grinding concave mirrors, hoping to build a telescope. Funding is denied. You propose building a canal to link Rome to the sea. Plans are shelved. You design a more efficient loom. Cloth merchants fear job loss and protest. You begin to feel like a relic, a man whose ideas are ahead of his time but out of sync with current priorities. This frustrates you. You retreat into your notebooks. You write of frustration. You write of patience. You remind yourself of your motto. Just as courage is measured at the edge of battle, patience is measured in the face of stupidity. Nevertheless, you find joy in the small things. You visit the Roman Forum at dawn, when dew pearls on weeds growing between stones. You run your fingers along fluted columns, feeling grooves carved centuries before. You draw the Colosseum, imagining gladiators. You sketch broken pediments, fallen capitals, cracked frescoes. You interpret what the ruins once looked like. You propose restoring them. You wander to the Tiber's banks and watch fishermen cast nets. You watch children play with sticks, drawing in mud. You pick up a stick and join them, drawing spirals. They giggle. You tell them stories about frogs. You recall your own childhood. You realize the cycle continues. One of your tasks is designing sets for papal entertainments. You propose a stage with moving clouds, representing heaven. The clouds are pulled by ropes. Angels descend on hidden pulleys. You design costumes for dancers representing virtues and vices. You hide messages in the sets, a fig leaf motif on a column, a spiral in a shield. The Pope's advisor warns you not to be too obvious. You comply. The performance goes well, people applaud, you quietly smile. Your health begins to decline. You suffer a stroke that paralyzes your right hand. You are terrified at first. You are right-handed. What will you do? You remind yourself that you have used both hands when drawing. You begin practicing with your left. You find it awkward, but manageable. You slowly regain some use of your right hand. You do not allow the setback to stop you. You continue to write, albeit slower. You dictate some entries to Melzi. You tell him that the mind is the most important muscle, not the hand. He nods. You believe it. When Francis's invitation arrives, you feel a surge of hope. Rome has drained you. Francis's letter is warm, promising support and respect. You recall meeting him once, years before, when he was a young prince visiting Italy. He asked you about your machines. You demonstrated a mechanical lion. He petted it like a pet. His eyes sparkled. You sensed his genuine curiosity. Now he is king, writing to you as an equal. You show the letter to Melzi. He beams. You decide, yes, you will go to France. You will spend your last years in a kinder environment. You begin packing. You say goodbye to Rome. You pass through the Porta del Popolo, looking back at domes and ruins. You feel bittersweet. Rome did not fulfill your dreams, but it enriched you. You ride out. The road north rises gently. The mountains ahead are blue and inviting. Life at Clos-Lucé settles into a gentle routine. You wake at dawn to the sound of birdsong, the scent of dew-laden grass wafting through open windows. You wrap a shawl around your shoulders and step out into the garden. The air is crisp, carrying the faint aroma of roses and lavender. Dew sparkles on leaves like tiny jewels. You bend to examine a rosebud, running your fingertip along its spiral petals. You pluck a fig leaf from a nearby tree, noting how sunlight filters through it, revealing its veins in glowing green. You breathe in deeply, filling your lungs with clean air, and whisper a gratitude to nature. Then you return to your study, where Melzi has prepared a breakfast of bread, cheese, and honey. You eat slowly, savoring each bite. You sip a warm infusion of herbs. You discuss the day's tasks with Melzi. You read letters from friends. You answer those that interest you. You spend mornings writing and drawing. You sit at your desk, a quill in hand, ink pot open. You write in mirror script, your hand moving smoothly. You copy old notes, adding annotations. You dictate to Melzi when you tire. You draw plans for machines you know you will never build. A water elevator to lift boats. A city with canals instead of streets. A rotating theater stage. You sketch birds from memory. You draw the folds of your own robe, using yourself as a model. You draw the face of a servant girl, capturing her kindness. You write a fable about a leaf that travels across continents. You laugh at your own jokes. Your cat leaps onto your lap. You stroke it absent-mindedly, its purring soothing you. You think contentment is found in the mundane. After lunch, you receive visits from King Francis or his sister Marguerite de Navarre. Francis arrives with a flourish, his cloak sweeping. He greets you with a kiss on both cheeks. He sits, unrolling plans for his fortresses or palaces. You look at them, advise on structural integrity, suggest improvements. You caution against building too close to the river. You propose decorative elements, a wing motif on a cornice, a spiral staircase as the centerpiece. Francis listens, asks questions, takes notes. He praises your wisdom. You enjoy his company. He is curious, energetic, appreciative. He reminds you of yourself at 15. You see the fig leaf motif in his ring. You know he values symbols. Marguerite is different. She brings poems. She reads them aloud, her voice musical. You comment on her metaphors, suggest revisions. She asks you to write a fable for her. You promise to try. You love interacting with these cultured people. They nourish your mind. Afternoons are for the outdoors. You walk along the river with Melzi. You watch fishermen cast lines. You point out patterns in water, clouds, bird formations. You pick up pebbles, examine their layers, speculate about their origins. You watch artisans building a new bridge, noting how they wedge stones, anchor beams, measure angles. You chat with the workers. They ask you for advice. You offer it. You help them solve a problem with a pulley by sketching a solution in the dirt. They thank you. You feel useful. You return home, your cheeks flushed, your heart light. Evenings bring reflection. You sit by the fire, the crackle of flames soothing. You read by candlelight, your eyes straining slightly. You choose works by Ovid, Virgil, Petrarch. You recite aloud, savoring the words. You discuss them with Melzi. You reminisce about your youth, telling stories of your father, your mother, Verrocchio, Ludovico, Machiavelli, Michelangelo. You laugh, you sigh. You remember the first time you saw the ocean. You remember the smell of frogs. You remember the feel of a scalpel. You remember the taste of pottage. You remember the first saw the ocean. You remember the first. You talk until your voice is soft. Melzi listens. He is patient, affectionate. He tells you of his own dreams. You encourage him. You tell him he will carry your work forward. He says he will. The fire dies down. You retire to your bed. Your body aches slightly, but your mind is at peace. You sleep, dreaming of spirals. The seasons in France mark time. Spring brings blossoms on apple trees. You smell sweetness carried by breezes. You watch bees pollinate flowers. You draw bees in your notebook, labeling wings, thorax, abdomen. You note how they communicate with dances. You design a glass hive to observe them. You never build it. Summer heats the stone walls, and you seek shade. You sit under a fig tree with your sketchbook. You draw the veins of the leaves, layering them like maps. You draw your hand under the leaf, shading. You watch as clouds form cumulonimbus towers, swirling like water. You guess when storms will arrive. You are usually right. Autumn arrives with grape harvests. Francis hosts lavish banquets. He invites you. You eat roasted game. You only pretend to nibble. Drink wine. Laugh at jokes. You play your lute. You tell fables. Winter brings frost. You draw frost patterns on windows, noticing spirals and leaf shapes. You stay indoors more, reading, writing, reflecting. During your last year, you receive visitors from Italy. Your half-brother comes to see you. He hugs you, tears in his eyes. He brings a basket of dried figs from Vinci. You taste one. It tastes like your childhood. You smile, grateful. You ask about your home. He tells you the fig tree still grows. You ask about Caterina's grave. He says it is well tended. You ask about Celaya. He says he is painting, selling his works. You feel relieved. You send money back with your brother. You give him a copy of one of your fables to share with your family. You promise to write. He promises to return. It may be the last time you see each other. You treasure the moment. After he leaves, you sit quietly, holding a dried fig. You smell it. You close your eyes. You are transported to Vinci, to frogs, to fig leaves, to the first pattern you ever loved. You open your eyes, look at your current leaf on the table, and smile at the full-circle journey. To fully appreciate the ripple effects of your life, one must imagine the centuries following your death as a series of discoveries, reinterpretations, and reinventions of your legacy. Your notebooks, so carefully penned in mirror script, travel through time like messages in bottles. Francesco Melzi faithfully guards them, but after his death, his heirs sell them off piecemeal. Some pages are used to wrap hams in markets. Others are clipped into scrapbooks by collectors who do not grasp their value. Decades turn into centuries. Occasionally, a scholar uncovers a codex and gasps at the contents. Accurate drawings of heart valves, designs for self-propelled carts, treatises on light. The scholar shows the pages to others. At first, few understand. Then more do. In the 19th century, your work is published, and the world stirs. Consider the emotion of the French mathematician who, in 1828, opens the Codex Arundel in the British Museum and finds diagrams of gear systems that anticipate modern machines. He runs his fingers over your mirror writing, slowly deciphering it, his heartbeat quickening. He realizes that you described inertia before Newton, that you sketched fractals before Mandelbrot. He feels both awe and sadness that knowledge lay dormant for centuries. He writes articles, introduces your findings in lectures, ignites renewed interest in your work. Soon, engineers and artists around Europe study your notebooks. They reproduce your devices. They build the aerial screw for exhibitions. They construct a bridge, following your design, and marvel at its stability. They test your diving gear in rivers. They confirm that you had glimpsed the future. At the same time, your paintings travel through their own odysseys. The Mona Lisa becomes part of the French royal collection, then moves to the Louvre after the Revolution. It hangs quietly until the 19th century, when critics and artists rediscover its allure. Romantic poets write odes to her smile, calling it inscrutable, inviting, maddening. In 1911, she is stolen by an Italian patriot who claims to be returning her to Italy. The theft creates a global sensation. Newspapers run her image on front pages. People who never cared about art suddenly know her. When she is recovered, crowds flock to see her. She becomes a celebrity. Tourists stand before her for seconds or minutes, snapping photographs, whispering, wondering. They do not know that you carried her like a talisman, that she was a part of you. They do not know about the fig leaf hidden on her bodice. But they feel something. They sense that she is more than a painting. She is a whisper from history, a link to you. Your scientific insights also resurface in unexpected ways. In the 20th century, doctors studying the human heart realized that Leonardo described the helical nature of the heart muscle correctly. They marvel that a man without modern equipment could see what CT scans later confirm. Neurologists cite your drawings of the brain's ventricles as the first realistic depictions. Botanists nod when reading your observations on heliotropism. Astronomers smile at your drawing of the moon's phases. Hydrologists respect your notes on river erosion. Engineers building robots look at your designs for articulated mechanical knights. You become a patron saint of interdisciplinary curiosity. Journals and conferences bear your name. Children learn about you in school as the quintessential genius. They draw their own Vitruvian men, measure their limbs, and feel a kinship across 5 centuries. In popular culture, your image becomes mythic. Writers imagine you as a time traveler. Filmmakers portray you as an eccentric inventor. Novels suggest you hid secret codes in your paintings. You become a symbol of Renaissance humanism. Your left-handedness, your vegetarianism, your fondness for animals, your rumored love affairs. These details feed lore. People project their own desires onto you. Some see you as a feminist, others as a queer icon, others as a futurist. Each view captures a facet but not the whole. The truth is that you were simply yourself, curious, compassionate, restless. In the 21st century, as humans develop technologies you dreamed of, flying machines, robots, artificial hearts, scientists and artists look back at your notebooks with renewed awe. They realize that you not only predicted but also philosophically prepared society for a world where boundaries blur between disciplines. You taught that art and science are not opposites but partners. You insisted on observation as the foundation of all knowledge. You advocated for humility in the face of nature's complexity. You believed that beauty is a form of truth. These values become more important as technology accelerates. People reread your aphorisms and find guidance. They create modern Da Vinci labs to foster interdisciplinary learning. They call upon your spirit to inspire young minds to cross boundaries, to pick up fig leaves and see universes. As you rest in your grave, though your exact bones may have been lost in the demolition of the Church of St. Florentin, your presence endures. Tourists walk the streets of Vinci, visiting your childhood home. They see the fig tree still growing. They touch its bark, feel connected. Artists visit Milan's refectory, standing in awe before the Last Supper. Scientists and engineers pore over your codices. Musicians play instruments based on your designs. Writers pen novels with you as a character. People around the world, hearing your story through sleep-time podcasts and bedtime videos, fall asleep to the rhythm of your life. They dream of frogs and leaves, spirals and wings. They smile as they drift off, imagining themselves holding a fig leaf, looking at the veins, seeing the world reflected. They feel comforted by your curiosity, your humanity. The final call to our listeners is sincere. The hearth of Stone Sleeper Stories remains warm. If you wish to continue exploring the quiet corners of history, to meet figures who shaped our world, to let gentle narratives carry you to rest, we invite you to subscribe. Each story will weave sensory detail, humor, and humanity, honoring the past while soothing the present. Until next time, sleep well, and let Leonardo's curiosity inspire your dreams. When frost painted lace on the eaves of your house and the breath of animals rose like smoke in the cold dawn, the rhythm of rural life slowed. The days were short, the nights long. Yet winter in Vinci was not a time of inactivity. It was a season of communal gatherings and stories that bound villagers together. Imagine yourself at 12, huddled with your family around a glowing hearth. The fire's warmth seeped into your bones, crackling wood, releasing resinous scents. Your stepmother stirred a pot of chickpea soup, the aroma mingling with the sweet smell of chestnuts roasting on the hearth's edge. Outside, wind moaned through cracks, rattling shutters. Inside, the flickering light made shadows dance on whitewashed walls. Your father pulled out a carved box, lifting the lid to reveal marbles, carved animals, and dice. Family and neighbors joined in games of chance, laughter punctuating the cold night. People told ghost stories about spirits that wandered between the years. You leaned forward, eyes wide, as your uncle recounted tales of wolves transforming into men, of witches flying over vineyards, of saints performing miracles. Such stories frightened and fascinated you. You noticed how each narrative used common symbols, crossroads, forests, fires, like motifs anchoring the listener. You tucked that knowledge away for later use in your art. In winter, you also helped with slaughtering pigs, an annual event that provided meat for months. Though you disliked killing animals, you were intrigued by anatomy. As men sharpened knives and women prepared basins, you observed with morbid curiosity how the butcher bled the pig, how the animal's muscles twitched even after death, how fat, muscle, and organs layered under skin. The animal's heart fascinated you, a fist-sized muscle pumping vigorously even as life drained. You memorized its texture and appearance, storing the image for your future dissections. Afterward, while adults hung sausages in the attic to cure, you sat by the fire and drew what you had seen. You hid your drawings, knowing some would find them disturbing. These clandestine sketches were your first forays into comparative anatomy. They taught you that structures repeat across species. A pig's heart is not so different from a human's. Winter was also a time of festivals. On Epiphany, children dressed as the three kings paraded through streets, singing songs and knocking on doors for treats. You and your friends carved crowns from paper, embellished with grape leaves and painted with soot and egg yolk. You carried a paper star on a pole, its points glittering with mica. You sang, your breath visible in the cold. Adults smiled, dropped nuts or dried figs into your sacks. In the evening, everyone gathered in the piazza around a bonfire. Men tossed old chairs and dried vines into the flames, sparks shooting upward, spiraling like fireflies. The village priest blessed the crowd. People warmed their hands, shared flasks of grappa, exchanged gossip. You watched the flames dance, shapes in their twisting forms, a spiral, a wing, a leaf. Fire, like water, revealed patterns. Another winter tradition was storytelling contests in taverns. Patrons gathered after supper, mugs of mulled wine in hand, and challenged each other to tell the best tale. Topics ranged from humorous anecdotes about local farmers to historical epics. You sat in a corner, listening. One man told a story about an eel so long it wrapped around a mill wheel and stopped it. Another recounted the deeds of Orlando, Charlemagne's paladin. You noticed how storytellers used voices and gestures, how they paused for effect, how they built suspense. You thought about how to translate such techniques into painting, how composition and lighting can create tension, how a pause is like a blank space on a canvas. Even as a boy, you were always translating across mediums. Winter gave you time to experiment indoors. You borrowed glass jars from your father and filled them with water. You dropped objects into the jars, stones, feathers, pieces of wood, and observed how they sank or floated. You noticed that some objects drifted down slowly, spiraling, while others plummeted straight. You stirred the water and watched vortices form around obstacles. You drew the vortices. You colored water with crushed berries to make patterns more visible. You realized that the same principles applied to air. You blew air across a feather, watching it vibrate. You built little wings from paper and string, weighting them with clay, then dropped them from the attic loft to see how they drifted. You recorded results. Your family thought you were playing. You were doing rudimentary fluid dynamics. Thus, winter in Vinci was not a time of stagnation, but of introspection and experimentation. It taught you patience, waiting for dough to rise, for ice to melt, for stories to unfold. It taught you to see beauty in scarcity, the curve of an icicle, the pattern of frost, the glow of embers. It strengthened your connection to community, as shared hardships bound people together, and it planted seeds for your later life, an appreciation for ritual, an understanding of anatomy, a sense of narrative, a habit of observation, a love of pattern. Winter was a teacher, and you were its attentive student. During your apprenticeship, you rarely saw your family. Communication came in the form of letters, fragile sheets of parchment folded and sealed with wax. You saved everyone. Reading them offered comfort on lonely nights. Likewise, you began writing letters home, describing your daily life in the workshop. Although no originals survive, imagine one such letter written after a year in Verrocchio's bottega. Dearest Father and gentle Caterina, I hope this letter finds you in health and warmth. The weather here grows colder, though not so bitter as our hills in Vinci. I write to you by the light of a single candle. The wax drips on my fingers, but I do not mind. It reminds me of the wax I saw melted into paint today. The days at Master Andrea's workshop are long and full. I rise before dawn to grind pigments from stones. Ultramarine comes from lapis, which we crush and wash until only the finest powder remains. It is more precious than gold. When I rub it in oil, It becomes a blue so deep it feels like the night sky. My fingers are stained with colors: green from malachite, red from cinnabar, yellow from saffron. I like the smell of linseed oil. It is earthy and sweet. After pigments, I stretch canvases, soak them in glue, and apply gesso. We prepare panels by gluing linen, then gesso, then sanding. Everything must be smooth. I spend hours drawing hands and feet. Master says the hand shows character. I have learned that each finger has 3 phalanges, that tendons make beautiful arcs when the hand grasps. I have drawn Giacomo's foot so many times, I know it as well as my own. At midday, we eat bread and cheese. I share stories of home, the others share stories of Florence. In the afternoons, we paint backgrounds on large works. I fill in landscapes with browns and greens. I like painting rocks. I imagine their layers and how water shaped them. In the evenings, I draw from memory: a street vendor's face, a pigeon on a rooftop, the pattern of leaves on a fig tree I saw in the market. I never tire of drawing. My fellow apprentices are kind, though they tease me for my quiet nature. Giacomo is mischievous. He once hid my brushes in the chimney. We laughed. Lucrezia paints beautiful miniatures. She shows me how to paint eyelashes. Tommaso carves frames. His hands are strong. Master Andrea is strict but fair. He says I have a good eye, but must be patient. He told me today that my angel's robe in the baptism looks as if wind breathes through it. I felt pride. He also said I need to learn the names of saints. I promised to study. Sometimes, I sneak out to the Arno at dusk. I watch the water ripple and reflect the sky. I see the bridge inverted. I feel the breeze. I think of Vinci. I hope to return soon to see you. Please tell Nona that I miss her stories. Tell my brothers I have made them a toy card. I will send it when I find someone traveling north. Father, you once showed me how to sign my name. I practice it in the margins of my drawings. Leonardo. It feels strange, like a new garment. But I shall wear it proudly. I remember the fig leaf I carried here. It sits pressed in my notebook. Its veins remind me of our hills. I must sleep now. I keep you in my heart. Send my love to all. Your son Leonardo. Writing letters forces you to organize your thoughts, to describe sensory details, to reflect. This skill will later serve you when you write reports for princes, describing your capabilities. In letters, you practice conciseness and clarity. You also learn empathy. You imagine your father reading your words by candlelight. You begin to write not just for yourself but for an audience. This dual consciousness infuses your notebooks. You write for present comprehension and for future readers, though you cannot imagine them. Letters thus become a rehearsal for posterity. Your many unfinished projects have generated endless speculation. Some call you fickle, others call you ahead of your time. To understand this pattern, one must delve into your experiments. When you began using oil paint on plaster for the Last Supper, you were captivated by the potential for luminous color and precise detail. You knew that traditional fresco required speed, painting on wet plaster that dries quickly. Oil allowed for blending and corrections. You prepared a smooth layer of plaster on the wall, then applied an underlayer of gesso mixed with animal glue. You added a thin layer of lead-white ground in oil. You sketched your composition with charcoal, then began applying color. Each pigment behaves differently in oil. Cinnabar is opaque and bright. Azurite is transparent. Verdigris is unstable and tends to darken. You experimented with mixing pigments, creating subtle hues. You layered glazes, waiting days between coats. You discovered that the oil does not fully absorb into plaster. Moisture seeps behind the paint, causing adhesion problems. Cracks appear, pigment flakes. You try adding varnish. It helps, then yellows. You test resin. It cracks. You realize you are venturing into uncharted territory. You note your observations. Oil on plaster susceptible to humidity. Dry environment necessary. You decide to proceed despite risks, prioritizing visual effect over longevity. Your experiment is both success and failure. It sets new standards for painting but leads to deterioration. You accept the trade-off. In your attempts to divert the Arno, you measure water flow at different points. You use a rudimentary flow meter, a stick with markings dropped into the water. You time how long it takes a floating object to travel between 2 points. You collect data, average them. You draw cross-sections of the riverbed. You discover that the flow is faster near the surface and center, slower near the banks and bottom, due to friction. You note that building walls will increase velocity and heighten flood risk. You propose widening the river to slow it. You suggest building reservoirs upstream to hold water. You devise diagrams showing water volume accumulation in reservoirs. You present your findings to the council. They marvel at your drawings but decline to fund your plan. You are disappointed but not surprised. You return to your notebooks, where the data remains for future engineers. When you design war machines, you do so reluctantly. Ludovico Sforza expects ingenious weapons. You deliver drawings of giant crossbows, cannons with multiple barrels, armored vehicles shaped like turtles. Yet, you hide within them flaws. The crossbow's string is too thick to pull. The cannon's recoil would shatter it. The tank's wheels cannot turn. You write notes in mirror script. This design is impractical. You fulfill your patron's request on paper, but protect your conscience by ensuring the machines cannot function. You later admit to a friend that you prefer designing bridges in mills. You worry that war corrupts science. You write, "Where there is shouting, there is no true knowledge." You vow to use your talents for healing rather than destruction when possible. Your unfinished paintings, such as the Adoration of the Magi, the Battle of Anghiari, and the Leda, are a result of your perfectionism and expanding interests. You begin with passion, research extensively, plan meticulously. Then, as you work, you conceive new ideas. Your mind leaps ahead. You see improvements, variations, completely different subjects. You feel compelled to pursue them. You rationalize. You will return later to finish. But time is finite. Commissions expire. Patrons lose patience. You move on. You regret disappointments, but not the exploration. You trust that the unfinished work itself holds beauty, the visible underdrawing, the raw energy. You believe that art can be found in process, not just product. Casting a bronze statue the size of a horse is a monumental undertaking. You began with drawings, studying horses in all conditions, resting, walking, galloping. You visited stables, tournaments, and farms. You measured the proportions of heads, necks, backs, legs. You sketched muscle groups, noting how light and shadow define volume. You then sculpted a small clay maquette, refining the pose. You chose a rearing stance, capturing energy. The horse's front hooves pawed the air. Its tail swished. Its nostrils flared. You sculpted the model in sections to better understand volume. Next, you scaled up to a full-size clay model. You built an armature of wood and iron to support the clay. Apprentices hauled clay from quarries. They mixed it with straw. You applied the clay in layers, shaping the horse's body, smoothing surfaces with wet hands, adding details with wooden tools. You hammered in nails to mark key points. You stepped back frequently, squinting to judge proportions. You invited equestrians to critique it. They marveled. Once satisfied, you made a plaster mold of the clay horse. You coated the clay with grease, then applied plaster in sections, reinforcing it with hemp fibers. The plaster dried hard. You removed it, piece by piece. You reassembled the plaster shell, forming a hollow mold. You coated the inside with wax and clay, building a negative space. You planned to use the lost wax casting method. Melt the wax, pour in molten bronze, let it cool, break the mold, reveal the bronze. You knew this method worked for smaller pieces. For a colossal horse, the challenge was heat distribution. You calculated the amount of bronze needed, over 70 tons. You designed a furnace with multiple channels to heat the metal uniformly. You planned vents to release gases. You consulted foundry workers, blacksmiths, and metallurgists. Some said it was impossible. You persisted. You built the furnace, collecting firewood and charcoal. You procured bronze ingots. You timed the melting. You stoked the fire. You waited for the metal to glow orange. Then, war intervened. Ludovico lost power, and the French invaded. They used your clay horse for target practice. You watched from a distance as arrows pierced its sides, as clay crumbled. Years of work collapsed. You felt anger, grief, resignation. You salvaged the plaster mold fragments, the drawings, the knowledge gained. You wrote in your notebook, "Patience conquers all." You knew that even if the horse was never cast, the lessons learned about scale, heat, and metal would inform future works. Indeed, centuries later, sculptors would cast large bronzes using improved versions of your method. Your horse lived on in concept, if not in bronze. On a cold November night in Milan, you descend the stone steps into the hospital's cellar. The air is thick with the smell of decomposition and disinfectant. A lantern flickers in your hand, casting dancing shadows on wet walls. The morgue is quiet, save for dripping water and the distant murmur of monks praying. A body lies on the table, covered with a linen sheet. The man, you are told, died of a fever. You bow your head, whisper a prayer, and gently peel back the cloth. His skin is pale, his chest still. You touch his wrist, no pulse. You begin. With a scalpel you cut through skin and fascia, revealing layers of muscle. You note the arrangement of fibers, their direction. You gently separate them, exposing nerves and blood vessels. You marvel at how the nerves branch like the veins of your fig leaf. You remark in your notes that the femoral artery splits into smaller vessels at predictable angles, similar to the branching of a tree. You cut deeper, exposing the femur. You tap it lightly. It resonates. You reflect that bones are both strong and light, hollow yet robust. You dissect the abdomen, noting the smooth liver, the spongy lungs, the coiled intestines. You are struck by the elegance of the kidneys, shaped like beans, filtering blood. You open the chest cavity. You see the heart encased in its pericardium. You slice carefully, exposing its chambers. You squeeze. It is surprisingly firm. You trace the aorta, noting its spiral twist. You write, "The heart is not a furnace but a pump. It moves blood by pressure and valves." As you work, you talk to your assistant, a young friar named Pasquale. He asks if you fear divine wrath for cutting the body. You answer that you see God's design more clearly through dissection. You feel no sacrilege, only reverence. You point out the diaphragm, the tendon that separates heart from liver, and show how it contracts to draw breath. You explain that understanding the body's mechanisms can help doctors treat patients. Pasquale listens, nodding, then faints. You laugh quietly, gently reviving him with vinegar. He returns to hold the lantern. You tell him a joke about a doctor who used goat horns in an operation. He chuckles nervously. You continue, hours slipping by unnoticed. When you finish, you wash your hands, clean your instruments, cover the body, you write notes by lantern light, your pen scratching on paper. You draw diagrams of muscles, bones, organs. You label everything. You include measurements. You write hypotheses about blood flow and respiration. You sketch cross-sections of limbs. You think about publishing your findings. You worry about church censure. You decide to encode some notes in mirror script. You hope future physicians will read them. You feel both exhilarated and exhausted. You climb the stairs into the night. Outside, the air is cold and fresh. You look up at the stars, bright above the city. You see Orion, his belt forming a straight line. You think about how the stars are patterns too, guiding sailors. You realize that your love of patterns spans from the micro, capillaries, to the macro, constellations. You go home, wash thoroughly, and sleep. In dreams, muscles turn into rivers, veins into branches, the heart into a pump moving water. Contrary to some rumors, you and Michelangelo were not always adversaries. There were moments when your paths crossed in harmony. One autumn afternoon, while both of you worked on cartoons for the Palazzo Vecchio, you found yourselves resting on adjacent benches outside. The sun warmed the stones. Michelangelo wiped marble dust from his hair. You wiped ink from your fingers. You exchanged nods. He broke the silence first. "How do you see color?" he asked. Surprised by his candidness, you replied, "Color is the child of light. Without light, color dies." He thought, then said, "Sculpture is the son of the stone. Without stone, it is nothing." You both smiled. He showed you a sketch of a muscular back. You admired the tension in the latissimus dorsi. You showed him a sketch of folded hands. He admired the subtle shading. For a moment, two giants admired each other. On another occasion, you both attended a court dinner. Wine flowed, tongues loosened. Someone asked who among the artists was greater. Michelangelo retorted that sculpture is superior because it is more difficult to remove marble than apply paint. You countered that painting can depict atmospheric depth, the texture of skin, the glitter of jewels, the softness of hair. He scowled. You laughed. The debate continued, lively but not bitter. Later, as you both walked out under the stars, Michelangelo admitted he envied the way you captured smiles. You admitted you envied the way he rendered veins in marble. There was mutual respect beneath the rivalry. At times, jealousy flared. When you proposed diverting the Arno, Michelangelo told friends that your plan was foolish and would ruin Florence. You wrote in your notebook that some sculptors think only in stone, not in water. He heard, and his pride smarted. He publicly called you a painter of dreams. You replied that he is a sculptor of nightmares. People laughed. The rivalry became fodder for gossip. Yet, when you saw him kneel before his St. Peter's Pieta, tears in his eyes, you recognized devotion. He in turn visited your studio secretly to see the Mona Lisa. He stood silently, tears welling. He whispered, "She's alive." You smiled and offered him wine. He declined but touched your arm in gratitude. Such quiet moments reveal that rivalry can coexist with admiration. A typical day in Rome during your residence there begins before dawn. The city is still asleep, but you are awake, sitting by a window overlooking a courtyard filled with potted citrus trees. The air smells of wet stone and jasmine. You write in your diary, "I dreamt of a spiral staircase made of water, endless, ascending without steps." You wash, dress, and descend to the kitchen, where a servant offers you bread and goat's milk. You eat quickly, eager to start your work. You pack your drawing tools, put on a cloak, and step into the early light. Birds begin to sing. You walk through narrow streets, past sleeping cats and flickering oil lamps. You reach the hospital of Santo Spirito, greet the porter, and enter the anatomical room. After dissecting until midday, you return to your studio. You find letters. One is from Giuliano de' Medici, asking you to design a headdress for his mistress for a masquerade. You sigh, then sketch a headpiece with feathers and pearls arranged in a spiral. Another letter is from an architect who wants you to judge his plan for a church. You agree to meet. You spend an hour over lunch reading a Greek treatise on optics. You underline passages, make notes. You then sit at your drafting table and draw a complex machine, a multi-barreled cannon that rotates like a windmill. You test the angles on paper, calculate recoil. You shake your head at your own design, writing "too brutal" in the margin. In the afternoon, Raphael visits. He enters with grace, wearing a velvet hat. He shows you a sketch of a Madonna and Child. You admire his composition. He praises your knowledge of anatomy. You talk about color, light, perspective. You discuss the ruins of Nero's golden house which he has been exploring. He invites you to join him. You promise you will. You talk about Michelangelo briefly, then change the subject. He leaves. You feel both inspired and melancholic. You realize that Rome's younger artists respect you, but also surpass you in energy. You write, "Youth moves faster than age. Wisdom must sometimes watch from the shade." Later, you meet with Giuliano. He shows you a blueprint of St. Peter's Dome. You suggest adding spiral ramps inside the double shell to allow priests to climb easily. He nods, intrigued. He asks you about fountains for his villa. You draw a fountain with water jets that create parabolas. You propose integrating a musical device so that water drops produce notes as they strike tuned bowls. He claps. He invites you to dinner. You decline politely, wanting to rest. You return home as the sun sets, turning the Tiber into a ribbon of gold. You pause on a bridge, watching water flow. You drop a leaf and watch it spin. You smile. At home you feed your cat, prepare a simple meal and read by lamplight. You write, "Today I saw inside a heart. I saw inside a young artist's mind. I saw inside a river. All are in motion." You go to bed, listening to the hum of Rome. You think about leaving. You drift into sleep, hearing the bells of St. Peter's calling monks to prayer. You dream of birds flying over ruins. In your final months at Clos Lucé, your dreams become vivid, blending memory and imagination. One night, you dream of walking through a garden at dusk. Fireflies flicker among box hedges. You hear the rustle of fig leaves and the distant croak of frogs. You follow a spiraling path lined with lavender. At the center stands a tree with wings instead of branches. Its leaves are feathers. Birds nest in its boughs, and when they fly, the tree seems to take flight too. You recognize the tree as a synthesis of your motifs. You reach out and pluck a feather. It turns into a leaf in your hand. You laugh. A voice whispers, "Everything you sought is here." You wake with tears on your cheeks, feeling a sense of resolution. You write down the dream. You show it to Melzi. He smiles, understanding. On a sunny afternoon, you dream while half awake in your chair. You see yourself as a child by the puddle in Vinci, watching frogs. Suddenly the puddle expands, becoming a pond, then a lake, then an ocean. You see waves crashing, swirling. You see a distant ship with sails unfurling like wings. You stand, water swirling around your ankles. The ship approaches. On its mast is the coat of arms of France. King Francis stands on deck, beckoning. You step aboard. He hands you a fig leaf. "We will sail to the sky," he says. The ship rises like an airship, buoyed by wind and your laughter. You fly over fields, cities, mountains. You see Milan, Florence, Rome, Vinci. You drop fig leaves over each. They drift down, landing on roofs, rivers, tombs. You wake with a start, heart pounding. You smile at your imagination's whimsy. You realize your mind refuses to rest, even as your body does. During one of your last walks, you find a spiral seashell in the garden gravel. It likely fell from a child's pocket. You pick it up, turn it over in your hand. You hold it to your ear. You hear the faint roar of the ocean, a physical memory encoded in calcium. You think about how patterns persist across time and space. You recall how you used to collect shells by the Arno, pressing them into clay to make impressions. You remember how you sketched spirals on scrap paper while your father worked. You realize the spiral has accompanied you from boyhood to old age. It is a symbol of continuity amid change. You slip the shell into your pocket, alongside your dried fig leaf. You touch them both frequently, grounding yourself. You plan to leave the shell to Melzi with a note explaining its significance. You hope he will keep it as you kept your leaf. You hope he will remember not just your art, but your wonder. As death approaches, you experience moments of clarity. You recall faces with startling detail. A fisherman's weathered skin, a courtesan's perfume, a monk's trembling hands. You remember the taste of mead, the feel of parchment, the sound of a crowd gasping at a festival. You think about regrets, paintings unfinished, inventions unbuilt, friendships neglected. You forgive yourself. You think about triumphs, moments when your hand captured the exact curve of a smile, when a machine worked, when a student understood. You feel gratitude for each. You think about the unknown. What happens after death? You hope for peace. You imagine your atoms returning to the earth, to the fig tree, to the spiral seashell. You feel yourself dissolving into patterns. You close your eyes. The garden hums. The world spirals. You slip away. After your death, Francesco Melzi dedicates his life to preserving and spreading your work. He organizes your notebooks, binds them, labels them. He writes a preface explaining their importance. He visits princes and scholars, showing them pages. Some are interested, others dismissive. He patiently explains your mirror writing, translating passages. He lends codices to mathematicians and engineers. He writes letters describing your discoveries. He resists selling individual sheets, though he eventually loses some under financial strain. He teaches students in the Lombardy region, passing on your methods. He encourages them to observe nature, draw from life, and think across disciplines. He becomes the guardian of your intellectual estate. Without him, much would be lost. When he dies, his heirs sell many codices to collectors in Venice, Paris, and Madrid. Each sale scatters seeds. One codex ends up in the library of the Duke of Windsor, who occasionally opens it to marvel at machines and anatomical sketches. He shows it to his daughter, who becomes a patron of science. Another codex is found by a Spanish engineer who builds a bridge based on your design to cross a river. The bridge stands for centuries, admired for its elegance and strength. Another codex ends up in the Vatican, where a young astronomer reads your notes on light and decides to investigate further. He later discovers the spectrum. A codex travels to Russia, inspiring the design of a palace staircase. Another lands in the hands of a French doctor, who recognizes your description of arteriosclerosis. He writes a treatise citing you, the first to do so. And so on. Each codex has a life, influencing people you never knew. Salai, your longtime companion, takes your vineyard and paints in Milan. He uses some of your studies as references, though his talent never reaches your heights. He lives comfortably until his death, always mentioning his connection to the great master. He leaves behind a few portraits that hint at your influence. People speculate that you appear in his brushstrokes, but the truth is simpler. He loved you, and his art is an echo of that love. The city of Vinci erects a statue in your honor centuries later. It depicts you holding a notebook, a fig leaf carved on its cover. Children play around the base. Tour guides tell your story. People buy fig leaf trinkets at gift shops. They walk trails named after you, visiting the streams and fields you once roamed. They pick up leaves, examine them, see the same veins you saw. They feel a connection. In Milan, tourists visit Santa Maria delle Grazie, entering the refectory with hushed voices. They stand before the faded Last Supper. They are struck by its composition, by the silent moment you captured. They read signs explaining how you used a new technique that failed. They admire you more for taking the risk. In Florence, the Uffizi displays your Annunciation. Visitors marvel at the delicate angel, the careful perspective, the blooming lilies. They trace the angel's wings with their eyes. They see the connection to the birds you loved. In classrooms, teachers use your life as an example of curiosity. They tell students that you asked questions incessantly, wrote notes in mirror script, pursued art, science, music, engineering. They encourage students to cultivate curiosity, to cross boundaries, to embrace failure as part of learning. They assign projects based on your studies, drawing plants, building bridges from paper, experimenting with light. They show your Vitruvian Man and ask students to measure their own proportions. They foster a sense of wonder. They quote your aphorisms. They tell students that genius is not reserved for the gifted. It is the result of paying attention to the world. Across the world, in communities of makers and dreamers, the name Leonardo da Vinci becomes shorthand for expansive thought. Hackerspaces call themselves Da Vinci Labs. Artists design exhibitions where paintings, sculptures, and machines coexist. Engineers create robots that draw, bridging art and code. Scientists at NASA send a mission to Mars named Da Vinci, carrying a helicopter-like drone inspired by your aerial screw. When it flies in the thin Martian atmosphere, they celebrate. They say, Leonardo would have loved this. They send a drawing of the Vitruvian Man, etched on metal to float in space, as a symbol of human aspiration. Your story continues to inspire writers and artists. Novels imagine you time traveling, solving mysteries. Films portray you as a magician. Games let players step into your shoes, mixing pigments, designing machines. Some interpretations are fanciful, but they all share a common thread. Respect for your mind. Your figure pops up in advertising, humor, and activism. Your face, with its long beard and searching eyes, becomes an icon like Einstein's hair or Frida Kahlo's unibrow. People dress as you for costume parties, carrying fake notebooks. They misquote you but keep your essence alive. Thus, your legacy is not static. It lives, shifts, and grows. It is a spiral, widening with each turn, encompassing more fields, more people. It is a fig leaf that covers ignorance and reveals patterns. It is a pair of wings that lifts spirits. It is a story told at bedtime to lull children into curiosity. It is a call to observe, to connect, to dream. Long after the last page of your notebooks is read, long after the last pigment particle falls from your fresco, the patterns you loved continue to unfold. People see a leaf and think of you. They watch a spiral and remember your notes. They feel a breeze and imagine flight. They smile, like the Mona Lisa, at the mystery of it all. As our journey draws to a close, let us return to the three motifs that have guided us: the fig leaf, the spiral of water, and the wing of a bird. Each began as a simple observation in your childhood and evolved into a rich symbol, carrying layers of meaning. Exploring these motifs in depth reveals not just their beauty but their interconnectedness, showing how your mind wove disparate phenomena into a cohesive worldview. The fig leaf first caught your attention because of its veins. You saw in its network of lines a map of rivers, a diagram of branching nerves, a blueprint of order in chaos. Over time, the fig leaf became a motif of modesty, growth, and connection. In art, a fig leaf covers the private parts of statues, symbolizing the tension between exposure and concealment. You appreciated this duality. In your life, the fig leaf represented your humble origins. Though born illegitimate, you clung to your fig leaf as a talisman of worthiness. You pressed a leaf between the pages of your notebook and carried it with you to Florence, Milan, Rome, and France, a small piece of home that grounded you. You drew fig leaves on clothing, architecture, and in the margins of your codices. You studied their structure scientifically, cutting cross-sections, observing their adaptations to sunlight. You used them as metaphors in fables, a fig leaf complaining of its lot, a fig tree sheltering travelers. You saw in the fig leaf a microcosm of the universe, the veins like rivers and nerves, the broad surface like a field, the soft underside like skin. You understood that the pattern of branching is a universal law, repeated in blood vessels, tree roots, lightning bolts. This insight informed your studies of the heart and the brain. It taught you to look for patterns across scales, to unify the botanical, anatomical, and geological. The fig leaf thus became a lens through which you saw the world. The spiral of water began as a simple swirl in a puddle. You watched how water moves around obstacles, how it forms eddies and vortices. You saw beauty in its motion and mystery in its form. Over time, the spiral became a symbol of flow, continuity, and infinity. You observed spirals in snail shells, horns, and seashells. You noticed the double spiral of the umbilical cord, connecting mother and child. You drew spirals in your notebooks, labeled them, measured them. You wrote about the logarithmic spiral, noting that its arms widen but keep the same shape as they grow, a property of self-similarity. You compared this to the growth of pine cones and sunflowers. You saw spirals in galaxies and hurricanes. You wrote in your notebooks, "The laws of water are eternal." You studied turbulence, noting how eddies form and dissipate. You used the spiral as a metaphor in your philosophy. Life, like a spiral, returns to similar points, but at a higher level, offering perspective. You recognized that time is not linear, it circles back. In your late years, when you found a spiral seashell in the garden, you smiled at the pattern's persistence. The spiral taught you that while everything changes, certain structures endure, guiding evolution. The wing of a bird inspired your dreams of flight. As a child, you watched birds and wished to join them. You sketched wings, dissected birds, studied feather arrangements. You noticed how wings taper, how feathers overlap, how musculature supports flight. You built models of wings, tested them. You concluded that human-powered flight requires an understanding of lift, drag, and thrust. Though you never flew, the wing motif shaped your inventions and art. You drew wings on angels, giving them anatomical precision. You hid wing patterns in drapery, hair, and foliage. You designed machines with wings, some practical, a glider, some fantastical, a helicopter screw. You wrote, "Ancient birds fly gracefully because they have light bones and broad feathers. Man must devise his own method." You recognize the symbolic power of wings. They represent freedom, aspiration, and the soul's desire to rise. In your fables, birds speak wisdom. In your notebooks, you juxtaposed diagrams of wings, with notes on spiritual ascent. The wing motif reminded you that not all dreams must be realized to be meaningful. Sometimes, striving itself is the reward. These three motifs intersect. The fig leaf's veins mirror the spiral's curves. The spiral's motion underlies the wing's lift. Each motif taught you about pattern, structure, and connection. They helped you unify fields: botany, anatomy, physics, engineering, art. They anchored your curiosity, giving you themes to return to when wandering. They inspired your experiments and your fables. They served as metaphors for your life: rootedness, flow, and flight. Rootedness in your family and homeland. Flow in your constant learning and movement. Flight in your aspirations and imagination. They also reflect the human experience. We root ourselves in communities. We flow through time. We aspire to transcend. Your motifs speak to universal truths. In a broader sense, the fig leaf represents the material world, the tangible, the biological, the immediate. It reminds us to study what is at hand, to appreciate the texture of leaves, the taste of figs, the warmth of wood. It grounds us, reminding us of our origin in the soil. It invites humility. The spiral represents time and the universe, the swirling of galaxies, the turning of seasons, the loops of history. It reminds us that events recur in similar shapes, that progress often follows a winding path. It invites patience. The wing represents the transcendental, the desire to break free from constraints, to imagine, to dream. It encourages ambition tempered by observation. It invites hope. Together, they form a triad of being: matter, motion, and mind. They echo the classical elements: earth, water, and air. They resonate with the human faculties of sensation, understanding, and imagination. Through them, your work attains symbolic depth. Reflecting on these motifs also reveals your methodology. You observed, connected, and then abstracted. You did not accept phenomena at face value. You looked for underlying principles. You noticed that the veins of a leaf and the branches of a river share a pattern. You questioned why. You hypothesized that fluids, whether sap or water, follow similar rules. You tested your hypothesis by watching water flow, by tracing veins. You applied your findings to human anatomy, to architecture, to art. You wrote in your notes, "Learn how to see. Realize that everything connects to everything else." This principle guided you. The motifs were tools of cognition. They allowed you to structure your overwhelming curiosity into manageable themes. They prevented you from being lost in the ocean of knowledge. They gave you anchors. The fig leaf motif found its way into your moral and humorous writings. In a fable, a fig leaf complains that it is forced to cover a statue's private parts. The statue replies that the leaf should be proud to protect such beauty. The leaf reflects and agrees. The moral: humility can mask greatness. In another fable, a fig tree grows proud and refuses to drop its leaves in autumn. Winter comes. Snow weighs down the leaves, and the branches break. The moral: those who cannot let go will be burdened. These stories, while simple, reveal your ability to invest everyday objects with personality and teach lessons. They show how motifs become characters. They also show your gentle humor. You found delight in imagining plants and animals speaking. This playfulness contrasts with your serious dissections, illustrating your multifaceted nature. The spiral motif appears in your musings on memory. You wrote that memory works in spirals. You revisit the same event at different times, each visit offering new insight. When you recall your childhood frog, you see it through the lens of your youth, then again through the perspective of a mature scientist, then again as an old man. Each time, the memory deepens. The spiral shape also describes your career trajectory. You revisited Florence, Milan, and Rome at different stages, each time expanding your influence. You returned to painting after engineering, to anatomy after art, to flight after water. You were not linear but spiral, circling back with broader understanding. Recognizing this pattern freed you from guilt about unfinished projects. You knew you would come back when ready. It taught you that knowledge grows in curves, not straight lines. The wing motif influenced not only your inventions, but also your ethical philosophy. You wrote that just as birds must work to fly, flapping wings, adjusting feathers, humans must exert effort to rise morally and intellectually. You argued that no one is born virtuous. Virtue requires discipline. You compared the soul to a winged creature. If nourished by knowledge, it ascends. If weighed down by ignorance, it stays earthbound. You saw flight as a metaphor for self-actualization. You also recognized the danger of unchecked ambition. Icarus flew too close to the sun. In your designs, you included safety measures like parachutes. In your writings, you warned against pride. The wing motif thus embodies both aspiration and caution. Contemplating these motifs also reveals your relationship to time. Your life was bounded by 1452 and 1519, yet your mind traversed centuries, reaching back to ancient Greece and forward to space exploration. The fig leaf connects you to Eden, to Adam and Eve, to the origins of humanity. The spiral connects you to the cyclical time of nature, the endless return of seasons. The wing connects you to the future, to technologies that would not be realized until centuries later. In collecting and cultivating these motifs, you wove yourself into the fabric of time. You ensured that your thoughts would resonate beyond your era. You did this intentionally, writing notes to those who will come after. You saw yourself as part of a continuum. This awareness shaped your humility. You knew you were a link, not the culmination. It also shaped your confidence. You trusted that your work mattered in the long arc of human inquiry. There is a certain musicality to the motifs. The fig leaf is like a bass note, grounding, resonant, foundational. The spiral is like a melody, twisting, evolving, repeating. The wing is like a high harmony, soaring, ethereal, aspirational. Together, they create a chord. Your life, like a symphony, introduced these themes early, developed them through variations, recapitulated them, and resolved them in the final movement. Listeners who pay attention hear the motifs return, recognize them, smile at their recurrence. They feel satisfaction, when the fig leaf appears again in the conclusion, when the spiral emerges in your final notes, when the wing hovers in your last dream. They sense that your life is cohesive, not random. They appreciate the artistry of your existence. From the perspective of our modern audience, the motifs also serve as entry points into your story. A child sees a fig leaf and wonders about its veins. She learns about you. A science student studies fluid dynamics and reads about your vortices. She is inspired by your curiosity. A pilot sees a wing diagram and traces your influence on aeronautics. A philosopher contemplates the spiral as a metaphor for dialectical progress. A poet reads your fables and writes her own. Each motif opens a door to part of your world. Each invites engagement. Each demonstrates that complexity can be approached through simple starting points. You taught that great truths are hidden in small things. You encouraged humility before nature's intricacy. In our daily lives, we can honor these motifs by noticing patterns. When we walk under trees, we can look up and see branches mimicking arteries. When we stir our coffee, we can watch the swirl and think of rivers. When we watch birds, we can marvel at the physics behind their flight. We can carry a leaf in our pocket as you did, to remind ourselves of rootedness. We can draw spirals when bored, to remind ourselves of flow. We can imagine wings when overwhelmed, to remind ourselves of aspiration. By doing so, we participate in your way of seeing. We make your legacy personal. Ultimately, revisiting your motifs reveals that your genius was not about isolated achievements, but about weaving a tapestry of insights. You did not seek fame. You sought understanding. The fig leaf, the spiral, and the wing were your threads. You wove them through art, science, engineering, philosophy, music, and storytelling. The fabric you created is durable. It has survived wars, fires, floods, ignorance, and neglect. It continues to expand as people add new interpretations. The pattern remains recognizable. Branching veins, swirling curves, airy arcs. It invites us to look, to think, to feel. In this way, your motifs are not static symbols, but living processes. They invite participation. They ask us to observe our own fig leaves, spirals, and wings. They call us to curiosity. As we finally lay down this narrative, may these motifs linger in our minds like gentle refrains. May we carry a small leaf in our wallet, trace spirals in the sand, watch birds with wonder. May we, like you, pause to ask why the veins of a leaf mirror rivers, why water swirls in a bowl, why feathers lift bodies skyward. May we find joy in the act of questioning. May we accept that some questions remain unanswered in our lifetime. May we feel content in the pursuit. And when we sit by our own windows, watching light shift and shadows lengthen, may we smile like the Mona Lisa, knowing that life is a pattern, a spiral, a flight, a leaf. May we find peace. Before we extinguish the candle on this long tale, let us follow your dream of flight beyond your lifetime. You did not live to see a human rise into the air on wings of their own making. Yet, your notebooks and models sowed seeds that germinated centuries later. Flight, once a myth, became reality. Consider the journey from your sketches to the first heavier-than-air flight. In the 18th century, Joseph and Etienne Montgolfier launched hot air balloons, lifting humans briefly above the earth. In the 19th century, George Cayley studied bird wings and built gliders, citing your observations. He sketched forces of lift and drag, echoing your notes. He wrote about an aerial carriage, reminiscent of your flying machine. Others followed. Otto Lilienthal, who in the 1890s made over 2,000 glider flights, died testing his craft. He kept a portrait of you in his workshop. He wrote that he was, quote, standing on the shoulders of giants of whom you were one. Then came the Wright brothers. In December 1903, on the dunes of Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, Orville Wright lay prone on a machine with wings and a motor. His brother, Wilbur, ran alongside. They had studied birds, built gliders, and tested wind tunnels, just as you had advocated. They turned to your notebooks for inspiration and validation. They understood the importance of controlling roll, pitch, and yaw, concepts implicit in your diagrams of birds adjusting their wings. When Orville released the propeller, the machine lurched forward on its rail, lifted off the ground, and flew for 12 seconds. It was modest, a hop compared to modern jets, but it proved that sustained, controlled flight was possible. In their journals, the Wright brothers thanked the pioneers of flight, listing you among them. They recognized that your dream had traveled through time and space to their hands. In the decades that followed, flight advanced rapidly. Engineers built biplanes, monoplanes, jets. Aviators circumnavigated the globe. Astronauts landed on the moon. With each leap, people looked back to your aerial screw and your glider drawings and said, Leonardo imagined it. When Igor Sikorsky invented the practical helicopter in 1939, he credited your helical rotor design as inspiration. When Guglielmo Marconi transmitted signals through the air, he acknowledged your studies of wave propagation. When modern fluid dynamicists developed equations describing vortices, they smiled at your spirals. When cardiologists invented artificial hearts, they recalled your accurate heart valve drawings. When surgeons pioneered reconstructive surgery, they consulted your anatomical sketches. Thus, your influence extended beyond art and into the very structures of our world. This coda also invites us to consider the emotional resonance of flight. When the first airplanes took off, observers felt a mix of terror and wonder, the same feelings you described while watching birds. Children ran alongside planes, laughing, arms outstretched like wings. People wrote poems about freedom and clouds. Some wept. The sensation of lifting off, of seeing the earth shrink, of feeling weightless, these experiences changed how humans perceive themselves. They realized that boundaries can be crossed. They saw the curvature of the earth, the patchwork of fields, the meandering of rivers. They gained perspective. Some felt closer to the divine. Others felt small. Flight expanded the human imagination. It allowed us to dream bigger. You would have wept with joy, then taken notes about air density and wing shape. Flight also brought new challenges: air wars, pollution, noise. Machines built to connect people also bombed cities. Jets roared over villages, startling birds. Rockets burned fuel, warming the atmosphere. Drones spied and delivered. Spacecraft carried satellites that turned night to day. Each innovation demanded ethics. You, who designed war machines reluctantly, would have cautioned us. You would have asked, how can we use flight for healing, not harm? You would have urged us to build bridges, not bombs. You would have proposed using gliders to deliver medicine to remote villages, building parachutes for emergency escapes, designing airships powered by clean energy. You would have insisted on observing nature to learn sustainability. Your dream of flight, had you lived, would have been tempered by your love of life. When modern engineers refine wing designs, they still study feathers. They examine alulas, the small feathers birds raise to prevent stalling. They test winglets that mimic birds' wingtips. They look at the elliptical wings of eagles and the swept-back wings of swifts. They run simulations that you would find mesmerizing. They combine art and science. They build aircraft with folding wings, reminiscent of your mechanical bats. They create parachutes shaped like leaves. They build kites to harness wind for energy. They develop ornithopters, machines with flapping wings. Some succeed for short flights, others remain experimental. The pursuit continues. Each attempt is a tribute to your relentless curiosity. There is a personal dimension to this coda as well. Flight is a metaphor for overcoming adversity. When people stand on the tarmac, waiting to board a plane, some feel anxiety. They clutch their ticket, breathe deeply. Others feel excitement. They look forward to seeing distant relatives, exploring new cities. Flight compresses time and space. It allows a farmer from Tuscany to visit New York in hours, a scientist to attend conferences around the world, a writer to find inspiration above the clouds. It shrinks the world, while also reminding us of its vastness. It prompts awe, humility, gratitude. Flight encourages us to think globally and to collaborate across borders. It fosters empathy. You who loved connecting disparate ideas would have celebrated this unifying power. In a broader sense, this coda reveals that dreams outlive dreamers. You did not witness flight, but your imagination ignited its possibility. You did not see your machines built, but they guided others. You did not hear jets roar, but you drew their ancestors. Dreams are like seeds carried by wind. They settle in fertile minds, sprout and bloom. They might take centuries. They might require new materials, new mathematics, new courage. But they grow. Knowing this can comfort us. Our efforts, our questions, our sketches might seem futile now. We may not see their fruition. Yet, they might influence someone centuries hence. Your life teaches us to plant seeds generously, without attachment to harvest. Your notebook pages, fluttering through time, became blueprints. Your quiet nights, scribbling by candlelight, fueled revolutions. This is the power of curiosity. As you rest in your grave, and as listeners drift off to sleep, the roar of jets and the whispers of pages turning blend. The world is quieter than a cockpit, but louder than your quill. Birds still fly, leaves still unfurl, water still spirals, children still watch frogs leap. Inventors still draw wings, artists still paint smiles, scientists still dissect hearts, people still hide behind leaves and still let go. Patterns persist. The night deepens. Stars move slowly across the sky, making arcs. You, if you can still sense, might smile. You would be pleased to know that your motifs live on, that your dream of flight is realized, that your call to observe remains heeded. You would whisper, "Keep looking, keep drawing, keep questioning." The world would answer, "We will."